Hi, I'm Mike,
And I'm Joe.
and you're listening to How Many Fingers Am I Holding Up, the podcast. And this week, we're reviewing Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice.
Murder Man!
Welcome to How Many Fingers Am I Holding Up, featuring two guys getting plastered and reviewing movies in a weekly podcast form.
And a special shout out goes to at Brain Snorts. Is that right? Is it Brain
Brain snorts or
Brain
brains snorts?
Snorts? I think it's Brain Snorts. But that's somebody that I actually know, a close friend at work.
Oh, really?
A guy that I know named Rich. He also suggested that we drink Jägermeister. But go ahead and check out his Twitter, Brain Snorts. He also has a website, brainsnorts.com.
Thanks, Dick. Short for Richard. It's fine.
But he's got an interesting website. He reviews film and books, and he's actually published a few novels.
Really?
Yeah.
Do we know that website?
What?
Can we plug him? Do we know what the website is? Or?
Yeah, it's that. It's brainsnorts.com.
All right, everyone check out Brain Snorts then.
So go ahead and check that out. And now we're going to embrace this terrible drink that Mike and he suggested Jaeger, but Mike and I went ahead and
Yeah, I'm going to do a Jaeger bomb because I
Yes.
don't mind being up until 4 in the morning.
I'm super sensitive to caffeine, so I have substituted Red Bull for ginger ale.
Is there no caffeine in ginger ale?
And isn't there not? I hope. I
I
don't know.
don't know.
Well, it's
Too
not
late now.
It's not Red Bull. That's
true, yeah.
That I had a Red Bull like a month ago, and I just didn't sleep that night. But this is me and Mike are very fond of this drink.
We used to do these all the time when we lived together in Wayne. We'd stay up till like 6 in the morning playing Call of Duty while taking shots of these. I'm putting...
It's like a great recipe for a heart attack.
Yeah, hold on. I want to find... Because I hope it says it on here. Usually it says something about not mixing with alcohol.
Which Red Bull's a very popular drink at a bar. Like you can Red Bull and vodka.
Maybe Red Bull's okay with it.
I think so. They provide
Maybe they don't have
Red
like
Bulls for bars.
guarana or whatever that one thing is that you're not supposed to. Or maybe there's just no actual caffeine.
How did we get started on? I remember that YouTube video that came out in like 2000.
Jaeger bombs.
Yeah. I got a brand new haircut. Me and all my boys would go to the bar.
Not right now, Chief. I'm in the zone.
Jaeger bombs. That was making fun of Guidos before like Jersey Shore was a thing.
Yeah.
That was like some yeah. All right, but let's.
I have a towel over my computer so this doesn't spray all over my
I'm just
computer.
gonna shield it with my hand.
That'll work.
Yeah. All right.
All right. I apologize in advance for the audio you're about to hear. Just
Yeah.
us sucking down for 10 minutes.
Because it's a full glass of Red Bull that you're dropping
Yeah.
a shot glass of Jaeger into. I'm gonna
right.
explain that for our moms who are listening.
Mom, this is what a Jaeger bomb is.
All right.
All right. On go. 1,
Batman
2,
versus
3. Dawn of Justice.
Shit, it's on my computer. Woo!
Are we safe? Is everyone all right? Is everyone okay?
How are the kids? Check the kids. All right. Now that your ears have been, now that your ears are bleeding from just glass smashing up
And
against.
then 10 seconds of silence.
Yeah.
Are they okay? What happened?
Where was I?
Where was I?
Oh man. All right. But
I guess we want to probably apologize for last week's episode. It was our first Skype episode.
Yeah.
And I guess it's just kind of that like effect where like you just stay on the phone with someone way too long when you're feeling it. We recorded for 2.5 hours last episode.
It was if you didn't listen the last half an hour, was me and Mike being like, "No, you hang up. No, you hang up."
But we're trying not to run as long this week. I mean, just because that was way too long and no one wants to listen that long.
No.
Maybe get these run times down, but also because we're going to be filming some test shots tomorrow for that short film that we were talking about last week.
That's right. We want to go into a little more detail. Yeah, we're going to be like location scouting. We're going to be blocking, which is essentially just test shots.
So, I mean, I guess all that we can kind of tell you now is that it's going to be a 3-minute short for the 2016 My Road Reel short film contest from Rode Microphones.
So to dip our toes into the film world.
To ease ourselves back into it.
Right.
We've always been eyeing this contest, and we kind of just argue about what to make and never end up doing anything.
I think this is their third annual film contest, and we've tried each kind. And the first one, I remember I was looking at a picture on Facebook the other day, and it was us at a very cool, great location that our cinematographer Jordan has access to, and it literally ended us all standing like in the location and arguing and about there was some sort of problem with lighting and everything.
Yeah.
And
we wanted to do like a night shot, I think, and we just did not have the equipment for it back then. But I think we've simplified things. We'll talk about the plot ideas and stuff like that at a later date when more is set in stone.
Right.
As of right now, we're kind of just like assembling cast and crew of friends and volunteers because we're cheap as fuck. Don't want to spend any money paying anybody.
No. Yeah.
Can't even afford to pay ourselves. But we'll post a link to the movie when we, because there is kind of like a user voting area of the contest. So in June, we'll be able to post a link to the film, and we'll obviously tell you guys about it, so you can crash the boards with some votes.
Right. I'm sure we will not leave you alone about that.
Yeah. You will hear way too much about that.
Yeah, via this podcast and all of our social media sites. But we'll need your help.
Yeah.
So
they have a lot of cool prizes for that contest, and obviously being a microphone contest.
Right.
Hopefully we can win some sick microphones so you can hear our voices better for the podcast.
That would be great.
It'll be real great. So I guess we can start talking about the movie a little bit now.
We certainly can.
We're reviewing, as we said, Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice.
Batman v Superman.
Batman v Superman, yes, very specific. And the IMDb description is, fearing that the actions of Superman are left unchecked, Batman takes on the Man of Steel, while the world wrestles with what kind of hero it really needs.
It's not like a bad description.
No, that's decent.
Yeah.
Can't really give away too many spoilers.
Right.
So just to kind of run through some of like the crew and makers of this movie. It was written by Chris Terrio and David S. Goyer, or more accurately, Terrio rewrote the script from an earlier draft by Goyer. And both of these guys kind of have some cool stuff under their belt. Terrio actually wrote 2012's Best Picture and Best Adapted Screenplay winner Argo, which also starred Ben Affleck. So I feel like that might have probably affected why they maybe brought him on afterwards, after David Goyer's draft.
Right.
David Goyer's got a pretty long filmography under his belt. He worked as a writer for a few notable trilogies, the Blade trilogy, and then the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy, and then also Man of Steel. So he has worked with Superman and Batman before.
Definitely, right.
And then he's produced an interesting array of films. Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance, The Forest, and then we talked about this, I forget what episode it was, but The Birth of a Nation, which swept like Sundance, and like I think it set a record for like
it was
a purchase rights or whatever.
Right, yeah.
At a
studio purchased from Film Fest or either Sundance. It definitely set a record for that. So that is a film we can look forward to this year. Yeah.
Haven't seen it yet, but that when I saw that just kind of stuck out because he's got a lot of like comic book superhero movies under his belt, and then The Birth of a Nation, which is like a really important, like racially charged, like
then it's like a smaller independent film.
Nat Turner, I think, and all that.
And then I think it was directed by I'll just do my usual rundown by I think it was directed by Zachary Snyder.
Zach.
No, Mom, call me Zach. And he has directed Dawn of the Dead, 300, Watchmen, Sucker Punch, Man of Steel, and the film that we're reviewing, Batman v
You're
Superman.
forgetting the most important one, Legends of the Guardians, The Owls of Ga'Hoole.
What is that? Is that
It was
a
like
thing?
an animated movie about owls of Ga'Hoole.
Oh no, I thought that was something else. Okay. Oh,
Nope, he directed
why?
that. I don't know. Maybe he's got kids. He is older.
Right.
And actually, the reviews were pretty mixed of it.
Right.
Because I that name stuck out, and I looked at it. And I was like, oh, it was that movie. It did all right at the box office, I think.
Legend of Guardians: The Owls of Ga'Hoole.
Yeah, I thought it was related to Guardians of the Galaxy or something, just because he always does comic
Right.
book stuff. But no, it's about owls.
Yeah, maybe Zach just needed that paycheck.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of in between. Maybe he needed money for Sucker Punch.
I think it's like PG too. Like I think it's like, although the reviews did say it had a darker tone. I never saw it though.
Right.
He's slated to direct Justice League Part 1 and Part 2,
right.
and he's producing pretty much everything that's going to be in like the DC extended universe. So like we can probably talk about that more later.
Right.
The film has a pretty incredible and just vast cast of people in it. You have Henry Cavill, Amy Adams, Diane Lane, Lawrence Fishburne, and Kevin Costner all reprising their roles from Man of Steel. And then we also add Ben Affleck as Batman, Jeremy Irons as Alfred, Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor, Holly Hunter as Senator June Finch, and Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. And then some crazy cameos too. I didn't know this until I read it. Patrick Wilson is actually the voice of the president on the phone.
Oh, okay.
Carla Gugino is the voice of the Kryptonian AI, which is actually a reprisal from Man of Steel as well. And then Michael Shannon again plays the corpse of Zod.
Right. Yeah.
And then they have a bunch of newscasters and personalities playing themselves for a lot of the TV segments. You got Neil deGrasse Tyson, Soledad O'Brien, Anderson Cooper, Nancy Grace, and Charlie Rose. Also interesting, Gina Malone was cast as Barbara Gordon, but her scenes were cut.
Really?
They said those scenes might be in like a director's cut or something later on, probably when the DVDs come out.
Right.
And then additionally, Ray Fisher, Jason Momoa, and Ezra Miller are featured in clips introducing the characters of Cyborg, Aquaman, and The Flash, respectively. And then there's a lot of names that I just didn't really think we'd had time or space for, but like that's barely like 75% of the recognizable and big names and characters that are in this movie. So it's pretty massive in terms of that. I gotta imagine that like half of the budget had to just be paying all these people who aren't going to work for light paychecks.
Right. Yeah. It was a big and long production. This was like 4 years in the making. I think this film. This is a very, very big project.
Well, it seems like they're kind of carefully crafting this entire. Because Man of Steel technically started the DC extended universe, which is their competition against the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I guess.
Right. And I'll get into that.
Yeah. I found this quote that I wanted to talk about just in relation to Zack Snyder that I thought was kind of interesting. He says, after Man of Steel finished and we started talking about what would be in the next movie, I started subtly mentioning that it would be cool if he faced Batman. You're in a story meeting talking about, like, who should Superman fight if he fought this giant alien threat Zod, who was basically his equal physically from his planet, fighting on our turf. You know, who to fight next. But I'm not going to say at all that when I took the job to do Man of Steel that I did it in a subversive way to get Batman. I really believe that only after contemplating who could face Superman did Batman come into picture. Which really sounds like someone who did take Man of Steel in a subversive way to get Batman would say.
Yeah, what a weird...
It sounds like an admission of guilt. Like...
Yeah. Zack Snyder is a weird dude, and like he was just kind of... I mean, the more I read about him, and a lot about all of these people is coming out via... Basically, there's a lot of press surrounding this, and a lot is coming out about them or whatever. But just reading a lot of what Zack Snyder says a lot of the time, I'm like, what? and like I don't know, like he was kind of like this faceless person when 300 came out. You know, he was just, I mean, he did what did I say? He did Dawn of the Dead, and then he did 300.
Dawn of the Dead, 300.
Okay, yeah. So he was kind of like a faceless kind of guy. But anyway, do you need the Jaeger?
Yes, I do.
All right. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that.
There's just a lot going on.
There is.
With the production of this movie. Where was I?
Do you have anything about the box office or whatever?
Yeah, the box office stats are actually pretty interesting. This is all just kind of straight from Wikipedia, but the film grossed 166 million in North America in its opening weekend, the 7th biggest debut behind Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 at 169.2 million, and in front of The Dark Knight Rises box office of 160.9 million.
What about The Dark Knight?
I'm assuming that was probably higher on the list.
Oh, okay.
I think that's still one of the top ones. The film had a worldwide opening of 422.5 million, which stands as the biggest opening for a superhero film. Oh, so maybe not. Well, I guess worldwide is different than North America.
Yeah.
But the second biggest for Warner Brothers and the 4th biggest of all time worldwide. In North America, the film set a new record for the worst Friday to Sunday drop for a superhero movie release in modern box office history, with a 58% decline, which was previously held by Fantastic Four. So it was definitely, I think, a result of like the digital age and the internet, where everyone goes to see it Friday, and then the horrible reviews, which we'll get into, come out, and by Sunday people are like, no, I don't need to see that. It sounds awful.
Right, yeah.
And then as of April 1st, 2016, Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice has grossed 224.4 million in North America and 363.4 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of 587.8 million worldwide.
I was just reading an article too, and I mean, it's not something that they can confirm because this is the Saturday night after it came out. Did it come out? Yeah, I think it came out last week.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're reviewing it the following weekend.
Maybe it's 2 weeks.
Yeah, but I was reading that weekend to weekend, it's about to break a record for one of the biggest drop-offs from first weekend to second weekend.
Yeah, I saw. I think they said it was like an 81% drop off from opening weekend to second weekend.
Yeah, second weekend.
Which is
so that's
pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty groundbreaking.
There was still a decent amount of people in my theater when I saw it.
Oh, definitely. My
definitely
was
not
packed,
as much as you would expect for a movie like this.
Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of repercussions, I think, from the box office. And I mean, I've also read articles that people at Warner Brothers and DC and everything are very they're worried. They definitely see this as a gigantic failure, or not a gigantic failure. They see this as a failure for the gigantic investment that they've made into the certain universe.
Yeah, not only this film, but the DC extended universe.
They put a ton of money. This is
supposed to be like the real kickoff for it. Man of Steel was just Superman. There wasn't really any crossover in it.
But this, so much so that there is a rumor. I don't know if this was confirmed. I remember you were talking about it. I was reading about it too. After these less than desirable box office results, Warner Brothers has demanded extensive reshoots in order to inject more jokes and lightheartedness into Suicide Squad. So I'm talking like everything from reshooting some scenes to like dubbing like Will Smith's mouth and stuff to
really?
Like yeah like they're scared, like they don't want this to be like and I think so
and we'll get into it more, but that's one of the biggest criticisms that I've heard of this film is that it's too serious. Right, it takes itself too seriously, which is definitely in like stark contrast to like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where it's a lot of jokes.
I also read an article. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
But I also read an article that kind of made me laugh. That Hans Zimmerman did the score.
That was actually one of my next notes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And did you read that article? Like he was just like fucking tired. Like he just did not.
I didn't hear it. I just knew that he had also done the Nolan Batman trilogy and Man of Steel.
He did it. Yeah. And
which I think it's. I don't know if I would have made the choice to hire someone who had already done the score for Batman, a separate Batman from like a separate technical like universe in terms of the comic books. Like that just doesn't seem like a great decision.
Right. And yeah, I mean, you could tell Hans Zimmerman has that superhero fatigue, and he said he was so frustrated with this film and so frustrated with this score and like what they wanted, and he's like, he just literally has in his contract now, he's like, I'm not doing any more Superman movie or superhero movies, period. He said like he got his people to get him out of the contract for Justice League. He says like, I'm fucking done. After this movie, he's just like, he's like before I even started, he was like, I was already tired. He's like, I couldn't do
I can
this.
understand that.
Yeah.
And I've like, even like, I don't know, like his score for the Nolan Batman trilogy I thought was great, and it had like some iconic moments. And while this score, like, it's serviceable, there's nothing that's like, oh, that's the Batman versus Superman score.
Right.
There's nothing that like stands out, and he's the type of guy that like likes to have those type of moments. He's had a ton of like iconic scores before. For the most part, not a great score. I did, however, like towards the end, there's a sadder moment in the movie.
I liked all of the parts that revisited the Man of Steel score.
Yeah, the Man of Steel score is actually pretty good too.
I like that a lot, yeah.
But towards the end of the movie, there's some choral kind of piece songs, whatnot, that are pretty cool. But overall, yeah, I think you can definitely sense that he's pretty fucking tired of doing these superhero movies. Talking about that negative reception, as we always do to gauge the reception of movies, we looked at the Rotten Tomatoes score, and the reception was overwhelmingly negative. It's got a 29% on Rotten Tomatoes. And just as a little exercise, I compiled a list of movies that have a higher score than Batman versus Superman. And these are just some of the greatest cinematic works of all time. We've got The Scorpion King, Paul Blart Mall Cop, Scooby-Doo, the movie, Transformers Dark of the Moon, and another Ben Affleck film, the original Daredevil. All of these are higher than Batman vs. Superman, and all those were in like the 30s or 40s, I think.
Mm.
But that doesn't look too good when those movies are doing better than
it doesn't
than what is supposed to be the landmark, starting of the DC extended universe.
Right. And I mean, one more thing before we actually get into the film is, and I'll do this every once in a while, just because this has been this, like, 4 years ago, they were like, guys, we're making Batman vs. Superman. Mm-hmm. And, like, it's been this nonstop sort of, like, media thing. And it's come to a pretty hilarious conclusion of just the negatively received critics and everything. But it's been a roller coaster. Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't even want to see it, really. Way before like they released any sort of trailer or anything, but I guess I just wanted to talk about before we went into the theater what our thoughts was, because I'll just follow up with that. I think I didn't see Man of Steel. I did see it before seeing this, mm-hmm. And I generally wasn't interested. They brought in Ben Affleck, and I was like, all right, count me out.
That was like a trending topic, like the day that they announced that casting, and people were like really mad about Ben Affleck being cast as Batman.
Right. And I mean, I just don't like Ben Affleck. I just don't want to see things with him in it. I think Argo was really, that pushed me over like the edge of just like, how do I save these people with my 6-pack abs?
Yeah, we got another 6-pack shot in this movie.
Oh my gosh,
got a few of them.
Well, no, we have a scene where Batman's like, this had to be like a Ben Affleck request, like this in his contract. He's like, I want a 2-minute scene of me doing CrossFit. Like,
I want to slam a hammer down on a full tire. This is workout.
With enough hard work, I can just be the same strength as an alien,
a demigod. Yeah.
I don't know why that's my Ben Affleck voice. He sounds a lot dorkier than that.
Yeah.
What was I gonna say though? Oh, anyway, I wanted this movie to fail. I wanted it to fail just because I just didn't.
You got what you wanted, Joe.
I didn't like the premise. Batman vs. Super... What? Why is that, like... The next thing...
That is a classic storyline from the comic books, and there is a whole
Right.
collected graphic novel, Batman versus
But I
Superman.
would have loved to see like a Superman 2. Like, you know, like
Yeah.
But I mean that's a point that we'll get into later. I didn't like the premise, knowing nothing about it. I didn't like Ben Affleck. There was just a few things I wasn't crazy about. It wasn't until it started getting really bad reviews that I went like, yeah, all right, like I'll see it. Like, I either want to see how bad it is and laugh at it and be validated enough to make fun of it, or B, I think we all kind of like being that outsider and being like, you know, the critics kind of might be wrong. Like, I think, like, I get off on, like, that kind of, like, opinion, kind of. So I wanted to have one of the two of those opinions. So, but that was my experience. That was sort of long-winded, if you want to go into.
I think you said it best with just it being like a roller coaster of like, I remember first hearing that they had announced it, and it was around the time I think when like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and like Avengers and all that started kind of taking off that I was first starting to hear about Batman versus Superman, and I was not crazy about that idea of like crossovers between like movies, and it was also I think like not too long after the Nolan Batman trilogy had ended, where that was like the pinnacle of like, you know, a film taking itself seriously, a superhero movie being an actual like good cinematic
It was a
work.
film, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and like
It wasn't a movie
trying to make
anymore,
everything realistic, and it was definitely not like a comic book movie. So I think at first I was a little turned off by it. Then the first trailer came out, and I was still kind of turned off by it. Then they announced like Ben Affleck, or we started hearing about Ben Affleck, and I was like, I don't know about that.
Right.
But we've been wrong before with like Heath Ledger and stuff like that.
Right, yeah.
Which I feel is also like the go-to, like anytime anyone like, because even when they announced Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor, everyone's like, let's just wait and see, because remember we didn't think Heath Ledger would be all right. But it's like never turned out as well as it did with Heath Ledger.
That was such a pleasant surprise. Or just kind of like the Daniel Craig as Bond, like wait,
Yeah, just wait and see.
we didn't like him either, but things
Like
that
that's
don't
only
seem
like
to
the
happen
only
like
case
that
of
anymore.
that like ever working out is with Heath Ledger, which is like one of the performances of like a lifetime, if not like all time. But then I think when
Took his lifetime
when they had
away.
literally the performance of a lifetime.
The end of a lifetime. Yeah. Go on.
Oh god. And then I think when they had the first trailer that really featured Batman in it, I did start to get excited at that point, and the roller coaster was kind of going up. And then it kind of just like a lot of time passed. I wasn't crazy about it. I think one of the more extended trailers came out with like Wonder Woman and stuff in it, and then I was like, oh, like this is really just starting to look like DC Avengers, kind of like,
Right.
or really just a setup film for the Justice League. And then the negative reviews came out, and I was like, oh, maybe this really isn't going to be like as cool as I thought it could have been. So my hopes were pretty low going into it, just because that's such an overwhelmingly negative score. Like we've talked about it before, like a 50 is like, that's a bad score on Rotten Tomatoes, but that could also just mean that like it's a polarizing like film.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like I can't remember what Tree of Life has on there, but I feel like it's something similar, or like when The Witch first came out, like something that we thought was like overwhelmingly a positive film,
Right.
had like a 50 with like the audience or something like that, which just means that it's polarizing. There's a lot of people that maybe don't get it, but I didn't think this would be one of those polarizing ones, and especially not at 29%.
The Witch really was the opposite of this, because it had a very low audience score and a very high critic score.
Yeah. So yeah, my idea going into this was that it probably was not going to be good.
Right. All right, so let's start with the film itself. And now, God, one of the other things about the Cloverfield episode is that we just went so hard into the plot.
Direct quote from Joe at like the hour and 15, hour and a half mark. I don't want to go too deep into the plot. 1 hour later.
Yeah, 1 hour later of just us verbatim. Okay, interior bunker. John Goodman takes a left step toward a barrel. It's just like, it got really bad.
Way too in depth.
But I mean, I would like to talk about specific scenes. I mean, let's talk about one of the 16 opening scenes of this film. there's so many openings. It's just like this movie doesn't actually start to like clot kind of until like 20 something scenes.
There is a lot going on.
There's
Well, I guess the opening is also an interesting thing to talk about, because I thought it was going to be a more Superman focused movie just because
Same.
Man of Steel had already come out,
right?
And
or that I kind of just still assumed this was the sequel.
Yeah,
but it's not. I think they made that clear.
I think it technically is, but like I've heard quotes from Henry Cavill or Cavill, however you say it, who plays Superman, saying it's not really a sequel. Like it really is just like all of our own film, and it is kind of just pushing this forward towards the rest of the DC extended universe.
He said through tears, like, I guess
Hello,
my Superman
darkness, my old friend.
wasn't that great.
If you guys haven't seen that, there's a great video out there.
Yeah.
There was a joint interview with Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill, and they're asking about, like, this was after opening weekend and how bad like the reception has been, like, and they just ask Henry Cavill, and he's kind of just going on trying to deflect it, but Ben Affleck just has the saddest look on his face.
He just like looks off into the distance or down or something.
Looking down, yeah. And the video like zooms in. Hello, darkness, my old friend. It's very good. There's one with Curb Your Enthusiasm theme too. That was really good.
Yeah.
But the opening scene is kind of Batman oriented, and I guess it's him having like a flashback. Or no, it's like a weird dream that he's having. But in that dream, he's kind of reliving his parents' death, which was weird to see just because we're coming from the Nolan Batman trilogy
right
so recently, where we've already seen, and again, in each of these Batman trilogies, or I guess it was 4 and the one before that, we've beaten this to death. Like,
right. And the thing is that there are so many in-depth like superhero references in this film, yet they still feel like they need to show the death of Batman's parents.
And when that scene first happens at first, it definitely put a bad taste in my mouth. It ends up making sense later, and we'll get into that as we get more towards some of the plot points that have to do with the climax of the film. But there is a reason for it.
Right.
But at the same time, reason or not, it is still just, you know, like we've seen this so many times before. We know exactly what happens to Batman's parents. Like,
but even this whole, I mean, even after they use this as a plot device, time and time again down the road, it's a super bizarre take of this scene. Like, Bruce Wayne's dad like throws a punch at the guy who's like points a gun at him, and then like he shoots
that was
him.
Also that's Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who was in Watchmen. He was
right.
The comedian is his name. Or,
yeah,
in Watchmen.
And
that was a cool cameo.
Like he throws a punch, and then the mugger like mounts his gun in Bruce Wayne's mom's pearl necklace, which is like awkward. This scene is like really over the top, and it's not in like an alley or anything. It's literally right in front of the movie, or theater.
Broadway, like yeah. Like it's pretty well lit.
It's just like so over the top. It
is. I think
the
even
mugger,
just in every version of Batman, it's always fallen into. I think just because of the time that Batman was created, like that like old like 40s 50s like idea of the seediness of New York, like
right, yeah,
where like it's not necessarily like, you know, Crips and Bloods and like gangbangers, like it's just like white like drug addicts with guns like killing you in like broad daylight, and like,
or just a mugging that goes wrong, really.
Yeah.
But this was like there, and even in the Nolan Batman, there's sort of like this misunderstanding kind of, and he shoots the dad, and then oh fuck, like shoots the mom or whatever. In this one, it's like no dialogue, just like slow motion pull out gun, slow motion Batman's dad like winding up for a punch and like going like this kind of, and then like shooting him, and then like putting his gun under like Batman's like mom's like necklace, shooting her. And like the whole time I was kind of laughing because like the mugger has like this look of horror on his face, like he's kind of like Zack Snyder's like a marionette kind of. He's like, oh god, Zack, no! Ah! Like he like slowly moves the gun towards the mom. Like he looks horrified the entire time.
It is over the top, but I think the one thing that maybe redeemed it for me, also on top of like it having a purpose later in the plot is that like that entire thing is like a dream sequence that
Right.
that Ben Affleck, or Batfleck as we'll call him from now on, is kind of reliving, and it's part of like his narration that he's talking about, like, you know, these dreams that he keeps having.
Right.
And even later in that sequence when they're kind of doing like a very short montage of his kind of adapting or adopting like the bat kind of persona, where he runs away from the funeral, he falls down into the hole and gets like surrounded by the bats. Like he literally starts like flying levitate, and being like lifted by the bat. So I kind of looked at it after the fact, maybe not so much in the moment, but after the fact, as being kind of a representation of his inner psyche, whereas he sees his dad as this like kind of, you know, brute macho hero type guy who would have, you know, stood up to the mugger and tried to save their lives. And then the rest of it, I think, is just Zack Snyder being, you know, slow motion and cinematic and trying to capture that like comic book feel.
Or just he's just
creating these iconic paintings, you know, essentially with, you know, the film.
Because and I mean, another thing that I in the movie theater and I didn't know what was coming, but the dad throwing a punch kind of is sort of via violence. He is escalating this situation where like it maybe would have gone a different way, kind of like in this scenario.
Well, I guess I'm saying it might not have actually happened that way. It's more just this is how
definitely,
Ben Affleck or Batfleck is seeing it in his dreams.
But as a filmmaker, that choice is a bizarre choice for Batman, because Batman sometimes is a peaceful.
Not in this movie.
No, he's not. But that whole every single dream sequence in this movie drove me insane, because as he's levitating out of the well, it's a dream sequence, but like the film feels like it can get away with him narrating at the same time too. And it was just like,
well, he's narrating about the dream. He's talking about having this dream.
But that doesn't work like that in film, though. I feel like nobody narrates dreams.
Well, no, and there's a lot in this that it's not necessarily, and I'll say this a lot, and it's kind of my defense for a lot of different things in this movie.
Okay.
And I think it is probably why a lot of certain parts of this movie have a negative reception with a lot of people and critics.
Right.
Is that it's not really a superhero movie. It's more of like a comic book movie. Like there are things that are done in this movie that are deliberately trying to recreate a comic book feel. And I think that works for some people, me probably being one of them. And I think it really doesn't work for other people. And it just does not. I think you being one of them, because you always bring up the point of a movie has to stand alone.
Right,
exactly. It's a movie, it's not a comic book.
But
I do agree with that, but I think in this there are things that I just thought were cool and really did capture that comic book feel. And I think that opening scene for me is one of them. There are scenes in that where it is calling back to that like 300-ness of just like uber slow motion, very stylized. But I think I like that about it. Like that scene with like the pearl necklace. Like, it's overstated, but I can see this being like a comic book,
right?
Which maybe is not a great defense for something, but I enjoyed seeing it in moving form of these kind of comic book frames where you could see that being a frame of, you know, a gun.
Right.
It's very symbolic. It's very visual. It's very, very over the top, which you would have to do in a comic book.
Right. But the gun, I mean, the pearl necklace, I can kind of be like, okay, you know. However, you know, things that fundamentally change the story, like throwing a punch, or just really any other dream example, it's, you know, it's more like a comic book, but these are based off. Batman is perhaps one of the longest running comic books of all time. It has one of the most extensive story canons in the world history, really. And just, you know, there's already a comic book of it, and like a lot of the things that happen in this movie don't actually happen in a comic book. So I feel like that kind of makes it a harder defense, you know?
Yeah, but I thought this was a little bit more like it's definitely drawing more on like the Frank Miller Batman, like even just like visually, like Ben Affleck, his build is not like Batman's we've seen before, where he's like kind of slim and more athletic. Like this is like an older, he's graying, he's tired of everything that's going on, and even just physically he's wide and like stocky, and he's got this you know, it's a wider frame than we're used to seeing Batman, which if you look at the actual way that like the Frank Miller Batman is drawn, it is like that. It's very like wide and like imposing. and also just old and beat up. And in the Frank Miller Batman, he is kind of just exhausted of like trying to be the better person all the time, and that's one of the reasons he's struggling, or things that he's struggling with in the Frank Miller Batman, The Dark Knight, and I forget what the one after that is. I don't know if it is Dark Knight Rises or
Returns.
Dark Knight Returns, yeah.
And I think the writers do talk about using that as they said they used that as an inspiration, but that they just kind of wrote their own story.
Yeah, they didn't take. I think they're more just drawing from the way that Batman was created in that. Because in Frank Miller Batman, he is like in this movie, 20 years into being Batman, just exhausted by what it is to be Batman, which is to try and be peaceful, to try and be above doing these kind of things, and it is a hard thing to deal with. I see you getting ready for.
I'm gonna drop a bomb.
Drop another bomb. I will join you. 3, 2, 1. Batman. Oh God! Right in my eye. That's got to be just really weird to listen to in the audio. Just like, where did they go? Where did they go?
But I mean, I'll talk about. I mean, I don't want to talk about this plot, but I feel like I'll just bring up points as I think of them, and you'll have to answer to my will.
Let's just maybe sort of set up the premise a little bit. I have to kind of think. I didn't actually write down too many of the plot points because we're trying to steer clear of it.
The plot is even so.
To just kind of like overarch
it. It's hard to follow. Yeah.
They set up Batman a little bit, and then the main thing that sort of pushes things forward is that, Batman is this tired old Batman that is kind of, I don't want to say grown lazy, but it's just hard to be this peaceful Batman anymore, and he is maybe a little bit more lax, and it's just, it's the crime is never going away. People are always doing things. So he's got some weird methods now.
He doesn't seem that tired though. He seems like pretty.
I thought I got
agile and kind of like, let's like he's out there.
I mean more like mentally tired of just like, you've been doing this for 20 years and there's still the same amount of crime. He doesn't really feel like he's made too much of a difference. And so he's got some.
One of the first scenes we pick up on him is like. Is that he's out there like doing something with like some sort of sex slaves, or help me out here. I'm trying to think of what.
Well, I forget how we're introduced to that, and we're falling into the same trope of just going through the plot again.
We are, yeah.
It's something where police are reporting to a house where he was kind of rescuing sex slaves, and he's just like hiding in the corner,
right?
And ends up getting away. But they find the guy who had been holding the sex slaves is like, I don't know if he's handcuffed, but he's like tied or something, and they end up seeing that he's literally been branded with like a bat symbol.
Which is a fucking ridiculous. I thought that was ridiculous. Like, at first, we see that scene, and I kind of think, like, all right, this is kind of going in, like, a weird, dark direction, Like, you see the trailer, and you see people, like, philosophize about this film, and it was, like, a lot like, like, if God was on Earth, or I feel like they talked about that scene before the movie came out, like sex slaves and like Batman fighting for this, and it seemed more adult and more sort of like, like whatever. And then he branded him, and I was like, that's a little strange. And then like later we hear on a news report that like, and like it's like in the tail end of a note, but it was like a very important detail that kind of like the audio raised a bit when it happened. But the news reporter was like, and Batman like branded him with his like bat symbol, which in prison is like the mark of death, and all of the inmates killed him. And I was like, what? Like, like he's in a prison full of like people that Batman put in there. It's completely contradictory to like, like when Rorschach like goes into like prison and he's like, shit, like these are all the people that I've put in prison, like I'm gonna have some rough treatment.
And I guess maybe their logic is like, they just hate Batman so much because he put them in prison, if criminals never go to prison before Batman. But that they just hate seeing his symbol. I mean, yeah, I did. I hate that symbol.
Hey, you're a guy who fought out against Batman. Let's kill him.
You probably hate Batman too, but you've got his symbol. Jump him.
It just that was like Batman like goes to the jail and he's like, listen guys, you see that symbol? I want you guys to wait. What the fuck? Did you put me in here? Like,
I don't want to kill him, but you guys can.
yeah, exactly. And I thought like maybe that's Batman's way of killing people. I was wrong.
And then I guess on the Superman side of it, he's kind of experiencing the society starting to turn on him, where they're starting to realize, like, yeah, it was cool that he was here at first and saving people, but for every person that he saves, there are these kind of like unforeseen consequences. Where, you know, like the scene that really jumps everything off is his girlfriend, or Clark Kent's girlfriend, rather, Amy Adams as Lois Lane, is in, I can't remember what country it actually is, some Middle Eastern country.
It's another opening scene. Yeah,
yeah, another opening scene, which that was probably my least favorite of all these. Like,
yeah, I didn't like
because it
this
started
at all.
feeling like a Michael Bay movie at that point. It wasn't as like stylized as the other scenes, which I think is when the film works best.
All right, yeah.
But she's doing her reporting stuff overseas, and she's interviewing some kind of Middle Easterner guy. I don't know if he's a warlord or
He's like a
terrorist or
warlord.
something.
Yeah, definitely.
Some kind of guy involved over there. And it kind of just all goes south, and she's held captive and whatnot. And lo and behold, Superman shows right up and saves her life. But then a bunch of other people are killed by someone else, like some CIA, or I don't even know if they know who it is at that point. Someone with a gun. That's one of the weirder plot points that's going on in the movie. Someone with a gun kills a bunch of people, and they do show that to us at the audience, that it's not Superman who kills them.
Right. And this is this is sort of a spoiler. What happens is, yeah, I mean, they have the privatized military kind of there too.
Yeah, contractors of some sort.
Yeah, contractors, and they shoot everybody after Lois Lane is sort of taken aside with the warlord. Before Superman gets there, we later find out that all of those men were hired by Lex Luthor.
The guys that
yes, who killed them and then bounced. Yeah.
So what it ends up looking like to the media and to everyone else is that Superman kind of just showed up,
took a gun out,
unchecked, and just killed a bunch of people. And it kind of raises this whole debate over, Superman's doing good things, but who does he really work for, and who controls him? And they keep bringing up the phrase, that he shouldn't be allowed to act unilaterally. And that's one of the side plots, or I guess one of the main plots in the movie, is that this what's her name? I had it written somewhere. Holly Hunter's character, she's Senator June Finch, and she's basically leading this charge to create some kind of legislation to basically dictate what Superman can't do, and to kind of bring him to justice in a way for the unintended or intended consequences of some of his actions. So Superman's basically just kind of witnessing society that was kind of like, praising him and worshiping him, kind of turning on him, and experiencing like mixed reactions maybe for the first time as Superman. But he's also seeing the stuff that's going on with Batman, and because of his kind of, raised moral compass, he is not too appreciative of the way that Batman is handling things in Gotham. So as Clark Kent, he's kind of looking into that himself. And then likewise, Batfleck and Bruce Wayne are noticing the stuff going on with Superman, and they definitely don't agree. And then I guess there was that other opening scene that was pretty important that we should probably talk about. I think that's actually the very opening, was it? Or was that after the Waynes dying? The scene where it's kind of a flashback to the
after, yeah.
Yeah, the fight with Zod from the first movie, but it's from Bruce Wayne's perspective.
Right.
And I guess there's a Wayne, I don't know if they're in Gotham, or I guess they're in Metropolis at that point, but they're, I guess there's a Wayne Tower of sorts in Metropolis functioning for his company.
It was hard to get, at some points in this plot, it was hard to be like, what are they doing in the same area kind of thing?
Yeah, I'd have to look at the geography of it, because I think they kind of make it seem like the cities are just kind of like across the lake.
Right, yeah.
And I don't know if that's like...
if there's any cities like that in America.
Well, because I thought Gotham was supposed to be like a representation of like Pittsburgh.
Oh, I thought it was Chicago.
I guess it makes sense because or maybe Metropolis is supposed to be more of Chicago because that's definitely supposed to be in the Midwest.
Metropolis is supposed to be New York City.
Is it?
Yeah.
I thought it was supposed to be closer to the Midwest. Like
Really?
it was like the closest city to where Superman actually lives. I'm not.
I'm not.
I'd have to look it up. So I don't know if that's something that they changed for the movie or if that is grammatic or geographically accurate to the comics of where these cities, because they do exist in the same universe. I just don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
But they make it seem like, oh, like you can just like take a train over to Gotham from
Right.
Metropolis. Where was I going with that? I totally lost my train of thought.
I know. Yeah. This is. But they show the end of Man of Steel.
Oh yeah. So it's a flashback to that fight from the first
Bruce
one.
Wayne's point of view,
and to kind of explain like because that's kind of one of the questions that I think everyone would have is like, well, like if Batman and Superman are these like really good characters that are kind of fighting for the same end, why would they waste time like fighting each other? Like,
right.
Are their egos really that big? And I think that's one thing that this movie does a good job of, is kind of providing an explanation for why would these two characters like want to fight, like beyond just like a brawl of like manly like ego scuffle type thing. Like why would they actually fight for anything that meant anything? And in this opening scene, I guess there's like a Wayne Tower of sorts in Metropolis, and while Superman, as we saw a lot in Man of Steel, is just kind of like destroying everything in his effort to defeat Zod, he ends up basically collapsing the entire like Wayne Tower and a bunch of people in it. And Bruce Wayne, obviously being the CEO of Wayne Industries, definitely feels that, and they show a few specific examples of him seeing, security guards, who ends up losing his legs because he's got a beam over them.
Right. Yeah.
He finds a little girl and he says, where are your parents? And she points up at the tower that's already like collapsed, and she's crying. So I think it does a good job of explaining why Batman, the type of guy who like wants to like save everyone and on like a real personal level, maybe isn't fully able to grasp someone like Superman, who's maybe thinking on the bigger scale of like, if I don't defeat this alien Zod by sacrificing a few towers full of humans, then he's going to destroy all of the world.
That's an understandable point of view for Batman. I think that's an understandable point of view for the general public, which made me. I was always kind of like, why isn't that court case or like surrounding the fucking 9/11 times 6, like, devastation that happened? I mean, they even built him like a 9/11 statue in the center of Metropolis. And I think there's some sort of, there's definitely a missed opportunity there. I think they could have just got rid of that whole, like, let's make this political. Let's make this about terrorist kind of, like, what if Batman had to fight, or Superman had to fight terrorists kind of, and I think they could have kept it more within the same realm.
Well, I think that was a thing where, like, they're, like, fighting, like, the terrorists and doing something, like, that's something where the government could have handled that, and that they didn't necessarily need Superman to intervene there, but he did anyway, and because of his actions, people died. Whereas, like, fighting Zod, like, the government couldn't do anything about that. They actually needed Superman to help them, and I think most people probably realize that Superman did the right thing, as much as that whole situation sucked. But I think there are probably people like Batman and Bruce Wayne that were also kind of like, yeah, but you killed, like, thousands of people in your effort to fight Zod, and I think that probably is just what ends up swinging. And I guess that kind of maybe explains, because that was a big criticism of Man of Steel before this even came out, was just like, yeah, Superman killed a lot of people in that like last scene. And was just like reckless in his fight to defeat Zod. And I think that this kind of maybe reveals that was intentional when they were creating Man of Steel, is to kind of create this device to sort of have the tables turn on Superman, where it's like, oh, like, yeah, you're saving us from these aliens, but you're a little careless in how you handle it. And not that anyone could do a better job than Superman.
I'll get into this later, just because it's later when more buildings get destroyed. But they make such a large effort to be like, oh, look, Superman's destroying that building, but that nobody's in the city right now. So those are just buildings collapsing. Nobody's here. Like, Batman literally looks at the camera at one point. He's like, good thing the city evacuated. And like, we're just, I feel like a lot of that sort of, either that plot line kind of is kind of trying to literally talk face to face with like critics of like, well, Superman killed a lot of people in that first movie, and I think that's them kind of
trying to think in advance in terms of plot holes and whatnot, and, you know,
right. And
because the plot is basically centered around this way that Superman handled the last film and his kind of disregard for life on a minuscule scale versus, you know, large scale society and civilizations as a whole.
Superman,
but then you have this, which I don't think this is really a spoiler. Obviously, in Batman versus Superman, they do actually have a fight at some point.
What? Whoa!
And I think they go to great lengths to try to explain why, in a movie that has a lot to do with Superman killing innocent people, trying to explain that no, but in that fight he doesn't kill, you know, innocent people. Don't worry about it. Like,
right. But I don't know. The Superman plot line in this film was pretty frustrating. I thought, just because it was like this court case. It was like Batman was against him. Just all because, like, you killed people, like, kind of thing. Or, like, can we trust him? He's an alien. When that was literally the entire plot in Man of Steel, was, like, you know, like, how do I get these people of this planet that I've been adopted to trust me? Do I take their side? Do I take the side of my people, or the side of the people who have, you know, taken me to their planet? And kind of, it was like it was an arc that was covered for another 2.5 hours in a different movie.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that is pretty central to just Superman as a character. Like, it's just the same as, you know, as going to be covered in other superhero movies in terms of their, you know, like Batman's been overdone with a lot of his stuff. And Superman is going to have, you know, some things that just kind of bear repeating, because that's what the Superman comics have always been, is kind of,
I also feel like
this feeling of him being an alien and outcast and revered as kind of like a god, but trying to just be like a normal guy. And
I don't know, in this movie, people fucking hate Superman. People, like, you know, there's Batman, and then there's
they do show the two sides of it, though, which I think this is another one of those, like, really like comic book looking iconic scenes, which I really enjoyed. I love a lot of those kind of, where it's literally like Zack Snyder is like painting like one of those like full panel like frames from a comic book. But when there's this, I think there's that like gala scene. It's in the trailers where Clark Kent like approaches Bruce Wayne, and it's like, oh, what do you think about what's going on in Gotham? During that scene, Clark Kent ends up seeing something on the TV about a little girl about to die in a fire in Mexico City, or some kind of Latin American country somewhere, and he ends up just leaving the party and flying right to there to stop like something in like real time, basically. And when he pulls the girl down from the building, he lands in this really beautiful scene. Literally, like I'm saying, it's like a painting, like his like cape is flowing behind him.
Right, yeah.
I think this is when Zack Snyder like really works at his best, and it was something that people kind of made fun of in like Watchmen and 300, but I think it's something that I appreciate, like just the way he just paints these scenes. And Superman like ends up landing in slow motion, and it's during like the Day of the Dead. I guess it's Mexico because it's the Day of the Dead. But all these people kind of surround him and end up literally just like bowing down to him, around him, with like this Day of the Dead makeup on.
It's the only thing we know about like Mexican culture as like American
Day of the Dead. They do that once.
It's like also Inspector. Yeah. That was a weird scene for me.
Scary paper mask.
Yeah, everybody's wearing scary paper masks. But that was a weird scene for me. Like, that was like, it was like the most depressing montage of like Superman saving people, and the music and like the expression on his face is just like, this is such a fucking burden for Superman. He's like every single time he saves something, he's like,
right. But I mean, that is intentional, and they touch on that later. There's a scene where he goes back to his mom, Martha, or whatever, and she has a line where she's like, "You don't owe these people anything."
Right.
Like, I think that's part of Superman's character. I think I was all right with that. I thought that kind of made sense, and right, we're preparing to do another
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 bomb.
little Jaeger bombs. Hold on, let me put my towel on my computer again.
You know what I didn't like?
Has your computer been getting wet with these, or
Uh,
you getting wet over there, Joe?
I'm getting wet, getting real wet over here. What I didn't like, and I mean, I like now that this is the first time that we can talk about Man of Steel too, because that's just another
true.
interesting movie. But there's
What is your overall opinion of Man of Steel? Just curious, because I've heard it from everyone else, but you haven't seen it.
I didn't like it.
I think I'm one of the few people, me and like Dan Martin, that like enjoyed Man of Steel.
Really? I talked to
it
Dan
doesn't-
Martin. He was like, it just wasn't a movie for me or something.
Oh, I could have sworn he told me he liked it.
I don't know. He was just
traitor.
like traitor. But what's it called?
Let's do this Jaeger bomb.
Okay.
Let's just let that thought be far behind, so we'll remember it. 1, 2, 3, go.
Oh wait, wait, you do yours, and wait, I'm just gonna talk real quick while you're doing yours while there's silence. But there's one scene where Mike's just like trying to gulp down, like also trying to listen. There's one scene where Superman goes to the top of like a mountain, and I guess he hallucinates or something. Like Mr. Kent, Mr.
Clark Kent.
Mr. Clark Kent, and he's like, son, yeah. Who I fucking hated his character in Man of Steel. He was just kind of like there's a scene in Man of Steel where he's like, Dad, I'm sorry that I used my powers. Like, those 30 kids were like drowning under the bridge, and he's like, what was I supposed to do? Like, let them die? And Mr. Kent's like, I don't want to say it, but yeah, kinda. Or like that whole like his death scene when he flies away in the tornado. He's like, yeah, Clark, stay here. I gotta go save the family dog. Like when you would probably be much more suited, just because I don't want to see these people. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't like that. But anyway, he's on top of the mountain, and like the dad appears, Mr. Kent appears, and he talks to him and tries to make this touching moment, but it was so not well placed, just because in Man of Steel, his actual biological father appears to him, but that's a mechanic of a Krypton spaceship, you know? And for them to use that device to just show his biological Earth dad was like, the fuck no, you can't do that. Like, that's not fair.
Yeah.
Like, you've already used that device as oh, it's just this technology that his soul still exists in the spaceship. And then meanwhile, it's like, I'm glad you're on top of this mountain, Clark. I'm stacking bricks in a pile. I just wanted to give you some advice.
Well, he is telling that very like convenient story about you know, even when you like think you're doing the right thing. Like, what is the example he gives of like you know, we thought we saved the farm, we were like diverting the river away, and then we ended up finding out that the next day that we had flooded the entire whatever farm. And
Lana's.
and I heard like the screams of the horses for like days and whatnot. It was, I mean, it is a little over the
You can't
top.
have your cake and eat it.
Yeah. But again, like I said before, and like I'll continue saying, and I think this is why probably my opinion is so split from a lot of people and critics, is that
Right.
I viewed that as being something that works really well in like comic books, and that I feel like I've seen kind of plot devices like that in comic books before, because there's so much more room for suspension of disbelief and whatnot,
But
that
that's
I was
using,
all right with it.
That's using two different writing devices, though. That's like if I saw that in a comic book, I'd be like, no, you did that for the spaceship. You can't do that again, kind of thing.
I don't know. I think in comic books you just have a little, because there's so much separation, I think, between issues and novels and what like that. Like,
But this would be the next issue, you know? Like, it's the next...
well, I think it's longer form than an issue, probably.
All right, but still, this would be two graphic novels back to back in the same series. I don't know. I would not take that shit in a comic book either. But they could have made it a dream sequence, because they seem to just make some crazy ass dream sequences for Batman. If you want to talk about that one where Batman's wearing a duster or a trench coat.
Oh, well, that's not actually technically a dream sequence. That's an actual like forced hallucination.
forced hallucination. Wait,
Or
hold on.
a vision, rather, I guess.
Hold on. Batman is wearing a duster or trench coat over his costume in the desert. And all this stuff happened.
To set it up, and I guess this would be semi a spoiler. I don't know if it's really a spoiler. It has more to do with the future of this DC extended universe than it does with this film in general.
Right.
I didn't necessarily mind it in terms of the way it's working for the whole universe. It was a little out of place in the movie. Like
Very out of place.
But I thought it was all right just because it bodes well and it kind of makes you think. And again, it was something that, for me, felt very comic booky. And this is also something we'll get into, is that Batman in cinema prior to this has been very, very grounded in reality. Like, even like the Tim Burton Batmans were like still trying to make Batman, a little bit more realistic. There wasn't a lot of like, there's definitely no like aliens and whatnot or supernatural stuff. Whereas in the comics, Batman, regularly interacts with Superman in the comics. Like, even in like some of the more grounded Batman series, like the Jeff Loeb, Tim Sale series, like Dark Halloween and all that, Superman makes an appearance in that. I think they even have like Super Dog in one of those.
Right,
like,
yeah.
A lot of like weird characters that don't really seem like they fit into the Batman we've come to know because of that. But I think there is a bit of like a culture shock in terms of we're not used to seeing Batman on film interacting with, aliens and otherworldly things, and we're not used to really like having to suspend our disbelief for Batman related storylines. But in this, he's either hacking something or he's downloading something somehow, something with his big bat computer down in the basement.
Right, he's downloading the files that he stole from Lex Luthor.
This 18-screen jerk-off station.
Right, yes.
He's downloading something, and he ends up having this kind of weird vision type thing.
It's a dream, I think.
I think it's a vision because it is supposed to be from the future.
But here's the thing, and I'm gonna skip a little ahead. That happened. Okay, so the desert thing happens, and then he dies in the dream, and he's like laying down at the desk, and he goes, and then the flash pops out of his computer screen or whatever the fuck is happening, and then once again,
I don't think that's actually Flash.
It is the Flash.
Flash is Ezra Miller, though.
Right, that was Ezra Miller.
No, it's not.
It isn't?
I looked at the cast. It's some weird... That was one of the other cameos I didn't have time to mention. But we'll mention it now.
But anyway, after that happens, once again, they play the same clip again of him waking up. It's like one of those dream tropes, like
Inception.
right, yeah. It's a dream within a dream when you want to sort of misdirect somebody to be like, oh, he's waking up now, and then he wakes up again. Because he does the and like a long time has passed, So he looks at the computer, and the computer, the loading screen that was at 1%, that was taking a very long time, is now at 100%. So I don't think it's a vision. But what happened?
I think it was Robin Atkin Downes. I think that's supposed to be. Oh, maybe that was someone else.
Yeah, I think it's the Flash, because the Flash has time travel powers.
Maybe you are right.
However, if that was supposed to be some sort of vision of the future, him waking up...
Well, not necessarily like a direct, like, oh, this is exactly what's going to happen in the future. But
right.
It's like a prophecy or whatever you would call it, or a, not foreshadowing, but it's supposed to kind of show him and warn him about what's supposed to happen in the future, which is just this kind of dystopian society, I guess, where it's basically like the set of Mad Max, like this like desert apocalypse, and weird moth people are attacking him.
Right, which is...
in the context of the movie, it is very confusing, and I remember getting kind of angry with the movie at that point, just because it just kind of comes out of nowhere, and you're like, what is going on? Like, why is he dressed like that? Like, why are there... what are these enemies that he's fighting?
His
like
duster was cracking me up over his uniform.
Although the action is pretty cool in that sequence, and visually it is pretty cool, but that's I think one of the first times where, like I was talking about, this kind of culture shock of like seeing Batman, like, hey, like we haven't even really seen Batman in other movies have different costumes, which is something that is pretty big in the comics of like having like, this costume and, you know, underwater costume and aerial costume and just all these different like versions of like, you know, play with me Batmans and whatnot. Like,
right. Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of the first time in the movie. It's not that late into the plot where that kind of happens, and you're like, whoa, like that's weird to see Batman fighting like these otherworldly creatures in some weird like post-apocalyptic like scenario, with another costume with like a duster on top. It is very kind of unsettling at first, but once you get past that visually, it's a pretty cool scene. But it is that kind of first introduction to like comic booky type Batman as opposed to the cinematic Batman.
Right, and when he's standing on the cliff, they do have that large Omega sign in the sand, which is a sign that the dark side, the enemy, usually has. So it's like, oh, maybe this is some sort of future or whatever. And the things with the wings that are coming down, those are parademons, which are like his foot soldiers. And this is like an actual scene in like a comic book. And but it happens in like a different dimension, I think, or it happens in the past before this happens. And then I think, which doesn't really make sense, because then the Flash, my interpretation is that the Flash time travels to warn him, which is why he shows up and he says, oh shit, he says something about I'm too late or I'm too early, and then he says something about Lois, something about that, and obviously in that dream sequence, Superman says like, you know that I loved her or something, and she's dead now. And then
he says something about like Lois Lane being the key or something about her being like important, like
but it was just like, it was so I mean, it didn't make sense with the comic books that they were adapting it from, which was also like super confusing when he's like, it does another like, tricked ya, it's just a dream. Like he goes to like visit his parents' grave again, and Man-Bat comes out of his mom's grave and goes, Rah! And I was like, the fuck? Like, is Man-Bat in this movie? Like, that's pretty wild. No, just a character that they took from Batman's canon and just added it into a dream. It's just like a bunch of random fucking shit that they put into this, and it doesn't make sense. And like, you know, like in comics, like those are his, like, you know, that's the monster of the week kind of. It's Man-Bat or it's Darkseid. But in this,
well, even when it's not like the monster of the week, like
it's like
it's something that is, again, and I understand why people are turned off by it, because like you say, you know, a film is supposed to stand on its own. It doesn't have to replicate comic books,
right?
But in comic books, that like crossovers and like whatnot, like that's a thing that happens all the time. Like it's really hard to find an issue of a comic book that's just completely isolated, you know, Batman and, you know, one villain. Like there's a mention of some other character,
right?
If not a cameo by another character. But in film, we've been kind of, I don't know if spoiled is the word, but it's been all these isolated cases of, you know, Spider-Man fights this one villain, right. Batman fights this one villain. But like having like two villains was like a treat when they did that, and like Batman and Robin, or like Batman Forever and stuff like that. Like that was like a huge deal when it was, you know, Two-Face and the Riddler, and then Poison Ivy and Mr. Freeze and those movies. Like it was a while before like it started, you know, to have more than just two characters from comic books like appearing in these movies.
But here's my point of view, is that this universe is a baby. This is the second film of this universe. Why are we mentioning things that have never happened in this medium? Why are we mentioning, you know, like, granted, yeah, there's crossovers, but that's after a few hundred issues, you know, like when they start to be like, oh, you know, like you remember this from episode 72, like kind of like thing. Like we're going into the second movie of this franchise, and they're bringing in all these things, and it's like this weirdly obscure.
It is a little fan service. It's fan service, yeah.
But
it's
fan service that's like, haha, tricked you. Like you don't know what this is, kind of like thing. Like that whole scene is like a bizarrely like weird.
Well, the Vision reference sequence, I think that is just a plant for a payoff later in the universe, not necessarily this film.
But that's
and in terms of judging this film on its own, no, it's not. That's not good for the film.
Right.
It was definitely one of the detriments of the film.
Right.
But when you step back and look at kind of what they're trying to do, which again, part of me like hates it just because I hate the kind of oversaturation of the superhero genre. So yeah, in terms of just this film in general and the concept of oversaturating the genre, that's not great. Mm-hmm. But I think I can still appreciate the scope of, DC Universe is, it's trying to compete with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and they've definitely taken a very planned and systematic approach to how they're going to release all these films and what's going to happen in each of them to kind of make this really big overarching storyline. So I could appreciate it in that way and sort of forgive it, but yeah, that was kind of one of the detriments to the film, is that scene alone.
Yeah,
because the plot is already, there's a lot going on as it is, and to just throw that in there, like,
it's
especially the first time you're watching it. I think maybe if I watched it again, knowing that it happens and not having to kind of fall into that trick of like, what the hell is going on right now?
Right.
Like, I think I would appreciate it more during a second viewing. But yeah, definitely during the first viewing, I was like, what?
Right.
Where is this? What is going on? Who is he fighting? Why does he look like that?
Right. Yeah. It just doesn't. I think.
Which I guess is supposed to be the intention, because it is kind of like a weird vision, and they do sort of explain it as it being a vision. But yeah, in the moment, very weird.
I don't know. I can't. I mean, as long as we're talking about the sort of. This is obviously like all planned around building a bigger franchise, but I just DC or the studio or whatever, whoever, Warner Brothers, whatever. I feel like they're just going about this all wrong. Like they want that like Marvel Avengers money, but they don't want to put the time that it took to build that franchise. Like Iron Man came out so long ago, and then Captain America, and then Thor. In a lot of these movies I haven't seen. This is coming from somebody who doesn't care about those movies, but I can appreciate the franchise that they've built. Where where DC has gone from like Man of Steel to let's put the entire Justice League Justice League is next. That's the next movie. It fucking plows through, just runs over an entire plot to try and put into like these Justice League kind of.
It is kind of a knee-jerk reaction. Although going back to that quote, which I had brought up just for the comedic value of what Zack Snyder says, but I think you can also kind of see that it might have also happened somewhat organically in terms of, what do we do next for a Man of Steel sequel? Oh, well, he could fight Batman. Well, if he's going to fight Batman, we could also start doing more crossovers, and holy shit, look at what Marvel's doing. Maybe we should just do this entire thing to like catch up. It is very blatantly and over the top just to set up film.
It's corporate. It's just so much of this. I think like about 40 minutes of this film is just corporate. Critics often talk about like having like a commercial break like scene, sort of like something that takes you out of it. And it's not a nice thing to say about a movie. And, directors want audiences to be fully immersed. But this movie, however, has a scene where Wonder Woman sits down with her laptop and, like, essentially watches, like, 4 teaser trailers for each individual, like, superhero in the Justice League.
Well, I think it's actually Batman that watches the clips at first.
Well,
he sends her stuff of her.
Right. But yeah. But she receives an email from Batman that was hacked from Lex Luthor, and there are all these like essentially like found footage clips of like the Flash, Aquaman, Cyborg, and like using their powers in public settings, and they're all fucking terrible.
That was probably my biggest complaint, was just those 4 clips there. Like, I understand what they're doing. I can somewhat forgive it, just because obviously they've got to try and set up this, whole conglomerate, universe that they're trying to set up. But yeah, those are fucking awful. The Aquaman one especially, it's the pacing of it, like, because it's the scene where like the music is kind of like racing, because it's like, not necessarily like a heist thing, but just like the intensity of like, so trying to make a scene of someone at a laptop intense, hacking through stuff, watching footage, like, it's almost got this like suspenseful, like horror type soundtrack. And then it's just this really slow paced clip of like Aquaman, like swimming out of like some like sunken ship. It's just like so slow, and then he kind of like slowly like swims back, and his hair is flowing, and then like slowly like moves his like spirit. It was just the pacing was all wrong. Like whoever was like set to like direct that like little scene, like because I feel like a lot of times they'll have like a set director just for like these little things, because obviously Zack Snyder can't be at every little mini clip thing that they have to direct. Whoever did that fucking dropped the fucking ball on that.
My favorite is that like these are hacked files from like Lex Luthor's like personal computer, and like I was like laughing to myself in the theater. I was like, like Lex Luthor like must have like a knack for marketing the Justice League movies, because he's already like drafted all like their logos in Photoshop and like he was like Wonder Woman. He had like this really nicely like Wonder Woman symbol on like a grid, like kind of he was like just like Jesse Eisenberg being like, oh yeah, that looks good, like we can make this work, this movie's gonna be hot.
Oh yeah, I read a comment somewhere. I was searching through the hashtag for the movie after I saw it, just to see what like people were saying, and someone had a pretty, I wish I should have remembered what username was so I could credit them for this thought. But they're saying just the way that the film is edited when Wonder Woman is reading the kind of the email from Bruce Wayne, like because he figures out who she is, and then he sends her the files, because within those like 4 clips is one of Wonder Woman, and him finding out that it was this lady he's been seeing at all these galas and important events everywhere. And the way that it's edited, this is not really a spoiler, because obviously we know that Batman and Superman are going to fight in this movie, but Batman kind of sets up all these traps and whatnot, and he kind of tries to bait Superman in, and he's just waiting for Superman to come. And then in the editing of that, we see that he sent an email to Wonder Woman, and the pacing and the editing of it makes it seem like he's just kind of like bored waiting for Superman, and it's like, oh hey, like let me just send this email to Wonder Woman right now, even though it's just her reading it at that point. But like it just seems like he like typed it like up while he's like sitting on a laptop, like, oh man, when is Superman gonna show up?
I don't know how I felt about Wonder Woman either.
I didn't like it when I saw it in the trailer.
Right.
Maybe let's just a tiny plot point just to bring everyone to where we are in that point. Lex Luthor has some weird thing where he's kind of just trying to create chaos. He obviously has something against Superman, and he kind of allows Batman, or I guess he realizes that Batman is trying to kill Superman as well, and has found his supply of kryptonite that he was using to try and kill Superman. So to kind of roll with it, he creates this scenario where he ends up, and I guess we will drop a spoiler alert here because this is getting towards the climax, but he kidnaps, I don't know, does he kidnap Lois Lane as well, or is it only Martha?
Both.
I think he kidnaps both, but Lois Lane is supposed to be a decoy where Superman doesn't also realize that he's also captured Martha, Superman's mom, and he basically ends up confronting Superman, and he's like, I've got Martha, you've basically got an hour, you have to either, I don't know if he gives him I think he just says you have to go kill the Batman.
Bring me back his head.
Bring me back Batman.
In his hour or your mom dies.
Yeah, in an hour or your mom dies. So that's kind of how the movie ends up explaining why would Superman, this guy who is always trying to be like take the moral high ground in the high road, why would he want to kill Batman for any reason?
Right.
Which I thought was kind of organic, and I was completely behind that. So yeah, Batman's kind of just like waiting in this, which they take great care to explain as a abandoned tower building type thing that no one's in. So don't worry, no one's gonna get hurt. And he has all these kind of booby traps set up for Superman. I forget what I was explaining that for. We were going somewhere with that.
I was just gonna talk about Wonder Woman.
Oh yeah. So Batman and Superman end up having their iconic fight there, which I thought was all right. I don't know if it completely lived up to the bill of the name of the movie being Batman versus Superman.
I think that's just a title to get people in theaters.
I mean, I think you obviously knew, like if you ever thought about like, what would someone write if they sat down to write a Batman versus Superman movie? Obviously that won't be the only storyline going on. Obviously there has to be some kind of, well, they're going to team up in the end and have to fight some kind of like greater evil, because that's always the story. But they end up fighting. Batman's got all his like booby traps going off, which is kind of cool, and he's even got like his like advanced suit going on to try and combat Superman. And there's a lot of like kryptonite stuff, obviously, because that's the only way to ever beat Superman at anything.
Mm-hmm.
And he ends up crafting this like kryptonite spear, and he has Superman cornered, and as he's about to basically drive this kryptonite spear through Superman's heart, Superman says, you have to find Martha. They're going to kill her. And that, as I had said we would explain before, is I think the reasoning behind showing the Waynes getting killed in the beginning is because Batman's mother's name is Martha Wayne. So I think they just needed a way to explain, that plot point. So I did forgive that kind of, beating that dead horse.
But that particular scene, I thought, was maybe one of the most cringeworthy scenes in the movie.
That's what I've heard a lot, and
because like there's like, okay, so there's this entire, I mean, just to rehash on some things that you were just saying, there's this entire buildup of the film, the titular conflict of Batman v Superman, and the fight really only lasts about 10 minutes. It's a pretty good like fighting scene, and then it's very quickly resolved when both of their mothers are named Martha. The scene is like just terrible, but we understand, again, why they've spent so much time on the Batman's parents. So Batman spares Superman and goes to save like Martha Kent by, murdering a bunch of guys in a warehouse, making their children orphans. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And then the resolution of that scene is just like, it's fucking mind-blowingly dumb. It just sounds like little kid fan fiction or little kid playing with like action figures, like, we both got mommies, we gotta work together. Like, kind of like,
I mean, I think that's kind of an oversimplification.
Like, everyone in the film has a mom. Like, why doesn't Batman work together with everyone?
But parents have always been so important to the Batman universe, in terms of like, it's the driving force behind why he became a superhero.
Right, but
the way that
if
his
the scene was better
murdered.
And it made more sense, I
thought it was alright. I know a lot of people have criticized it.
What'd you say, Martha? What'd you say? Like, anyone else would be like, Martha, and then like, that's his mom's name, and then be like, that's a weird coincidence. Like, like anyone else would do that, but like,
no, I mean, I don't know. I understood it as like Batman has kind of been stuck in this almost like fever dream type obsession with Superman. Even like Alfred, like, who's always like his voice of reason, is like, he's kind of on the same side. Like, why are we focusing on Superman? He's not the enemy here. There are other people to worry about, and that's kind of just the thing that snaps him out of it. Is like, what have I become? Which I think is what the entire movie is trying to portray, is this kind of dark Frank Miller version of Batman, where he's tired of everything. He's, turning into something that he wasn't before because of just how exhausted he is with being a superhero and trying to do the right thing. That's why he's killing people. And that's kind of the thing that kind of makes him, which again doesn't necessarily fit with the scene where he kills a lot of bad guys, but he, in a sense, is just kind of turned around and being like, what was I doing? Like, why was I planning to kill this guy who I know is a good guy in the end? And, I think that's also a thing where it kind of humanizes Superman in Batman's eyes, where Batman was viewing as like, he's a freak dressed as a clown. He's an alien. He's not one of us. Like, why are we letting him, try to save the world around us and act unilaterally? And that's something where he's like, oh, he's got parents. Like, I had parents, and I know what it feels like to have one of my parents killed, both my parents killed,
right.
More so. So I even in the moment and when stepping back, I appreciated that, and I actually really liked that climax scene. I know I'm against everyone that's ever reviewed this movie because that's one of the most like criticized scenes in that film. I don't know. Visually, it was working for me. I thought that was one of the parts where the Hans Zimmer score was actually really working really well. Is that climax scene. And as much as I was hesitant to grow towards Ben Affleck as Batman, I thought that was one of the better acted scenes from his part, just really showing that like realization of like, oh shit, like what am I doing? Like, it really is just kind of like an awakening of like snapping out of this kind of obsession that he was having. And I just thought it was really well acted for being a very over the top kind of comic booky type resolution to this plot line for the movie.
Right.
So I appreciated it. I can see why other people wouldn't appreciate it. I think it takes kind of a different mindset that I had already gotten into at that point of accepting the kind of comic book plot line, comic book visuals, just it really just being a comic book movie and not necessarily a cinematic movie like we were maybe hoping for coming from like the Nolan trilogy.
Right.
So I appreciated it, but I can definitely see why other people hated it. Absolutely.
Right. So then Batman goes to rescue Martha Kent and, again, makes orphans. Kills people.
Makes more Batmans.
Yeah, kills people in the warehouse. Although this time there's a few more fatal injuries. We even talked about that car scene, which I'd love to talk about too. And then he gets to the room where they're holding Martha Kent hostage, and the guy's pointing a flamethrower at Martha Kent. So then Batman...
Well, they had said something about
she'll burn like a witch.
Yeah, she was...
But so then Batman looks in the scene and he's like, ugh, and then he shoots the propane tank and then covers Martha with his flame repellent cape. And then they get back up and there's charred bodies everywhere. And Martha Kent goes, I knew you were a friend of my son's because you got a cape. It was just the worst time for humor ever.
It was weird, but I think that was one of their instances of trying to insert humor. And I think maybe if there had been more punchlines,
that was the first.
If there had been more punchlines throughout the movie, it would have made more sense. But yeah, it was the first and probably almost the only just straight up punchline in the movie. Even the Nolan Batman trilogy that took itself very seriously and succeeded in that still had a lot of punchlines, where there was just a button to a joke.
Right. But it just seemed like Batman just fucking fried a room full of people, and then they get up and he's like, I'm a friend of your son's. And then she's like, I knew so. You had a cape on.
That was weird, just because that felt to me more like a movie trope as opposed to where the rest of this film was a lot of comic book tropes and stuff like that. That's the type of line that wouldn't really work in a comic book.
Right.
But it's kind of like a device of a lot of superhero movies or just blockbuster movies. The pacing of it is very, rehearsed, and we've seen that kind of pacing before in movies. I think we can also maybe talk about Lex Luthor and Jesse Eisenberg's performance, because we haven't really gotten into that yet.
Oh, the Joker?
It's similar to a note that I had.
He's like an insane person who just wants to create chaos.
I think he is in terms of Jesse Eisenberg, it is well acted and performed, but there's just some poor character choices.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of villains maybe suffer for this in movies now, of just living in the shadow of Heath Ledger's Joker, which was not only the best comic book villain performance that we'll ever get, but just an iconic film performance, even outside of the superhero genre. There may never be a performance like that again. And I think a lot of actors, when they get a villain part in a superhero movie, are like, oh, but what if I could be just as good as Heath Ledger? And, Jesse Eisenberg, who's had critical success with a lot of his movies, was probably just kind of foaming at the mouth at the idea of playing Lex Luthor, who is probably Superman's most iconic villain for that universe.
Right.
He went, he really was kind of like a Joker copy in terms of wanting to create chaos. He does have this weird kind of obsession with he keeps saying demons don't come from below, they come from above. That comes back 2 or 3 times, and obviously referring to these aliens and whatnot that keep coming to Earth in terms of Superman and Zod and whatnot.
He just my biggest complaint is that I feel like Batman's sort of intent for this movie, or to kill Superman, was put out there, but there was no real Superman was kind of unguided this entire film. And Lex Luthor, I feel had zero motivation for this film. He just kind of flung out of the sky, from space almost. He was just they introduced Batman into this movie, and they introduced Lex Luthor into this universe that Superman's already been in. But Lex Luthor already knows that Bruce Wayne is Batman and that Clark Kent is Superman. When he has them both at his gala event, and that's bizarre. And I don't know his motivation for anything. I feel
I
he's
think
just
when you
there
look at his hard drive, he's obviously been researching these kind of superhero characters. Yeah, they definitely didn't do enough kind of, and that was even when I
like
was
he's just
watching the
there-
film, I was like,
yeah.
you know, we need to learn more about Lex Luthor. He makes no sense right now. Like he's
Right.
kind of just like a zany, I put the phrase cocaine villain. Like he's literally just like trying to be like as eccentric as possible. And like I think if we had more backstory to explain like why is he this kind of person, that might make more sense.
And he's not even Lex Luthor. He's Alex Luthor.
yeah. And they,
I don't know.
well, I think this is kind of, I guess maybe we're at an hour and a half, but we'll give a spoiler alert again. At the very end of the film, after all the fighting is kind of go on, they do see him, you know, shaving his head, and I guess that's probably when he's becoming Lex Luthor, and this is kind of the origins of Lex Luthor in terms of the DC.
But he says
extended
his
universe.
dad is Lex Luthor.
Does he say that?
Yeah, he goes like there's like 3 separate occasions where it's like you might have known my dad. He was Lex Luthor, or like something. My dad was Lex Luthor, and like they talked about like Lex Luthor, like he was like this iconic thing. He's like, I'm not Lex Luthor, I'm Alex Luthor, and he kept saying that over and over again, like
I
trying
don't know
to
if I caught
distinguish
that, but I mean,
that he's a different
either way.
person.
I don't think the Lex Luthor that his father is the Lex Luthor of the comics.
Right.
Because they don't make any reference to him being any kind of like super villain of any kind. He's not in Arkham or whatever. That like this Lex Luthor, Alex Luthor ends up in the end of the film. So I guess yeah, I mean, and that is part of his character. And they do have that one scene that was all right, and I thought pretty well acted by Jesse Eisenberg, where he's kind of explaining like living in his father's shadow. And I really wish they had expanded on that. And the one thing that I kept thinking of was like Kylo Ren from the Star Wars trilogy, where yeah, he was like weird and young and like, you know, erratic, but that was part of his character. And they explained that, you know, by his, you know, trying to separate himself from Han Solo and living in the shadow of Darth Vader and all that. And I feel like if they had fleshed this Lex Luthor out more with that kind of stuff, his decisions might have made more sense. Like, you know, he's erratic because he's young and whatnot. And they talk about him being young
Right.
a lot, but they only have that one scene of talking about, you know, living in the shadows of his father and, you know, dealing with that kind of thing and trying to be your own person. If they had done more of that, I think a lot of his choices would have made more sense. And yeah, you can technically draw a line to his choices from that one scene, but it's not really enough in terms of a movie and a work of cinema
Right.
for me to really like justify a lot of his other stuff. And it ends up being where you can kind of just see the fingerprints of the actor in terms of trying to overdo it and not just be a film performance, but be a supervillain in a superhero movie performance in the era post Heath Ledger's Joker. Like it's just, you can just see that obviously it's inspired by that and trying to live up to that, but ultimately just kind of falling short in the shadow of Heath Ledger's Joker.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of supervillains in movies have tried to do that. And the ones that do the best are the ones that try to not overdo it and not try to be iconic and just, you know, play the role for what's written. Like,
Right.
I don't think there's, because even like in the comics, Lex Luthor, I don't remember him being very like,
No, he wasn't.
he's weird, he's zany, but he's not like, you know, super talking fast. Like, oh, you should fight this guy, right? Like literally like talking like a mile a minute. Like,
He was like some like coked up like Max Landis almost. Like
Yeah.
I feel like that's who they tried to base it off of.
yeah, and it is well acted. Like, it's not like he's like
No, yeah.
struggling with this. It's just a poor character choice. And I don't know if that was something that Zack Snyder pushed on Jesse Eisenberg, or if Jesse Eisenberg was trying to do his own thing and create this kind of iconic thing. But it's like, well, we've already kind of seen that. The writing is not strong enough. You kind of, not that he should have dialed it in, but you dialed it back more for this. And
Right. Exactly.
just,
There's-
you know, been, because there were things in the writing that kind of carried the character of Lex Luthor more than the acting did. Like, there's the one kind of joke with the Holly Hunter senator character says the thing about like, oh, you can hand me like a can of piss and call it Granny's peach tea or whatever, some like, you know, southern kind of colloquial phrase.
Right.
And then there's a scene later where they're all in a courtroom and Lex Luthor has some kind of funny line to Holly Hunter's character, and then while she's giving this speech in the courtroom, or I guess it's like a Congress room or something, or it is a courtroom, it is a hearing, but she looks down and sees this jar, like a mason jar that kind of looks like urine, and she turns around and the label says Granny's peach tea, and that's right before everything blows up.
Because he puts a bomb on a wheelchair.
Yeah, like, and that, I think that's more telling to Lex Luthor's character,
definitely.
like that kind of like, you know, humor and like just being like a sarcastic asshole that's also evil at the same time. Like they probably could have done more of that to carry the character rather than relying on Jesse Eisenberg's like zaniness to carry the character, because it just feels unjustified. It doesn't really feel like it's adding much to the character at all. Like it's just kind of like, oh, he talks fast. That doesn't make him evil. Like,
right, yeah.
And he seems he's not like Heath Ledger's Joker, said a lot of weird stuff and had a weird way of talking, but his character in terms of his actions was also very chaotic.
Right.
Like he just lived for chaos. He talked about that all the time. Whereas Lex Luthor is very calculated in the things that he does.
Right.
And
he's a business mogul. Like, he's somebody.
And he has a motivation in terms of this fear of, aliens, in terms of like Superman and other worldly things coming down. And
they never really expressed like his hate for Superman. Like, I feel like that was something that kind of got like,
I think they do they could have done more of it.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of his character just needed to be fleshed out more. And like, it's the type of thing where like, if you're the writer of this movie, you can be like, oh, well, if you look at this scene, it's there, but it's not there enough in terms of where you really, really felt it. You kind of have to look really, really close with a microscope to find, these kind of things. They are there, but definitely not there enough to really justify a lot of this stuff.
I hated that like, I don't know. It goes along with like I felt like nobody really liked Superman in this movie. Whether it was like, I felt like they wasted so much time on like these like fake CNN interviews, and then it's like that terrible protest scene outside of the courthouse, and the one guy has like an undercut with like he painted an alien and then like a cross through it on like his upper temple. It's just like nobody seems to like him.
See, I did kind of like that scene because that was just like quintessentially like Zack Snyder channeling like his experience from Watchmen at the same time. Like that scene felt very Watchmen. Oh, there's a few scenes of like protest and crowds that I really liked in this, because like in any other movie, and again, this goes back to the whole comic book movie versus just a movie in general trying to stand alone. I think this movie, for me at least, succeeds as being a comic book movie because of scenes like this where it is kind of like a panorama or like a big like mosaic that you would see like in a comic book as an actual, just full frame panel where it's like this big crowd. And rather than it just being like, kind of blurry faces behind the point of focus, everything's in focus. And there's no just like extras in the crowd. Like everyone, you can tell Zack Snyder like handpicked for their appearance. We want a fat guy here. We want a thin lesbian looking like, anarchist type person here. And then we want like a farmer type person here. Like everyone is handpicked for their appearance. There's no just like whatever extras. Everyone's in focus, very animated, actually like acting out these specific expressions that creates this like there are in a lot of other points in this movie, just this like, again, like a full panel type frame that you would see in a comic book that visually is really, really cool for me. I don't think many other movies have really succeeded in that besides Watchmen. There's a lot of scenes like that in Watchmen with like, the riot crowd scene with the comedian and the Night Owl or whatever. So I thought that scene worked just in terms of channeling that kind of, even if some of the choices were weird, it still felt like Watchmen and Zack Snyder and comic books. So I was kind of okay with it. And
the court case scene was kind of Watchmen-esque too, when it blows up and Superman's standing there. It kind of reminded me of the court case with Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen when he goes to Mars after everybody.
Just leave me alone!
Yeah, but just back to the Superman thing, I don't know. With a film that's like Batman vs. Superman, I don't know. I feel like if Batman is so dour, sort of, I kind of wanted Superman to be a little more bright or colorful, just a little more. Like, I mean, I think within reason it could have been like even after Man of Steel. Like, and I get the CNN stuff, and I get like that it's darker, like, and I also get that, like corny Christopher Reeves Superman couldn't exist in 2016. I get that he's dead. I just, but seriously, I understand that they're trying to create like a modern Superman, but they waste so much time on these stupid CNN interviews and like this political climate. Like, we get it. We live in 2016. There's a certain suspension of disbelief, where we can imagine that the media would argue about like Superman's living on Earth. Like, do we trust him? And these news reports, they're not like a great plot device. They don't reveal anything. They're just sort of there. I don't know.
The movie does try to just do a lot.
Yeah.
And there definitely was room to trim some stuff out.
I don't know. Let's talk about that. So Batman hasn't killed anybody yet, and Lex Luthor is basically importing this found kryptonite in like the West Indian Ocean or something. And so then they're transporting it from the boat, and Batman's been tracking this from the boat to the Luthor Corp or whatever. And Batman's like, I want that kryptonite. So like so they start driving away with it with the truck, or like he obviously engages in some sort of fight. He's killing all these guys, or I think he's like hurting guys, and they start to drive the truck away or whatever. He's only like, I guess, shot 2 guys or something. He sniped them with like some sort of like knockout thing or whatever. And then they're all like about to like leave the shipyard, and the gate's opening, and they're all like stopped. And then like headlights turn on, and like these 2 or 3 guys in a car like look over, and then like Batman just fucking T-bones them. And the car explodes. And I was like, no, Batman, no. And then he like goes on and just murders so many people in this scene. There's even one point where he kills everybody in a car, and then he uses a cable and it attaches to the car, and then he whips the car around and like slams other cars like with that whip and stuff.
I mean, that scene I didn't mind as much because I think that fit into the kind of plot of him being stuck in this kind of like obsession and like fever dream of like, I need to kill Superman at any cost. This is the most important thing right now. The scene I had a more problem with was when he was trying to save Martha, which like should have been him like snapping out of that and being like, I need to go back to being the Batman I used to
change.
Be. Yeah.
Right, yeah. There had to be some
like
sort of change,
really wish he had not killed anybody in that scene, because that would have made the entire thing make more sense. It'd be just that much smoother and more polished of a plot if it would explain his hatred for Superman, and it would kind of not justify it, but make like it would just show how obsessed he was with like, I need to fucking kill this like alien that's causing havoc on my planet. Like, if I'm willing to go to something that I wasn't willing to do before, that was kind of a defining part of my character, that I wouldn't kill anyone. It would have made more sense if he didn't kill anyone after that, like, and it would have made that scene I think mean a little bit more. And which I thought was really, really well acted, him literally just kind of like snapping out of like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, if he had like a kind of a total 180, I think that would have made more sense. And it would have kind of painted him as like the villain beforehand and then kind of the hero afterwards.
Right.
Which I think would have been a really cool device. So I have more of a problem with the Martha scene.
The car chase though, it's like almost useless, the murder chase. Because it's almost he's following this kryptonite. He's killing all these guys. He's blowing through buildings. He is the unstoppable force in this Batmobile. And then he runs into Superman, and obviously nothing can stop Superman. He's unflinched, and the car goes flying, and Batman's injured and everything. And he stops him, which is actually one of my favorite sort of like Superman scenes. And he's like, this is over. Kill the Bat. It's done. Just stop it, or I'll kill you. Or like, you're not exactly
he's
that.
Just threatening him to kind of change his ways.
Yeah, he just says, stop it. And it's very demanding. It's very in charge. And Batman's like, kind of like, oh, okay. Like, kind of like thing, which propels, if I can't be a vigilante, like, I'm going to kill this guy kind of thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that whole scene is dedicated to him getting like the kryptonite, and then like that happens, and then like 2 scenes later, like what probably would have been a cooler scene is that Lex Luthor like returns to like Lexer Corp or whatever, and like Batman essentially stole the kryptonite off screen. Like, how did he do it? Like, we don't really know. But like it's just like it was so random that like I would like chase these guys in cars for like 10-15 minutes, but then like off screen I took the kryptonite and now I'm working on it in my lab. It was just kind of like it was just another sort of balancing act that I think was misplaced weight.
I think we started talking about this before and then we got sidetracked, but the Wonder Woman reveal and kind of side plot. The other thing is that Lex Luthor, he specifically requests from, I guess it's the government, the Zod ship and Zod's corpse and whatnot, and he ends up using that to and interact with because I guess he like slices off Zod's fingertips to get fingerprint access to the ship. Ends up through the AI and his blood and Zod's corpse creating, I'm not actually sure what the character is called.
Doomsday.
Oh, Doomsday.
Who, I mean, we've already said spoilers, but in the comic books, that's who murders Superman. That's who kills Superman.
I gotta brush up on my Superman. I thought it was Bizarro. I think Bizarro was like just because I thought it was like the perversion of Superman. But I guess they didn't go there yet. They don't actually say Doomsday in the movie, though. I don't think they just
they say Doomsday.
Do they?
Yeah.
Who says it?
Lex Luthor. That's what he names him. He's like, this will be your Doomsday Superman, Rise Doomsday or something. And
I don't remember that.
I don't know. It's just also a popular character because he's the only person who's killed Superman. And Doomsday doesn't really look like that, really. And Doomsday in this movie is not a compelling character so badly that it's just like, he's just like a fucking cave troll from Lord of the Rings, like kind of like, I don't know.
But yes, Lex Luthor creates Doomsday, and it's kind of this thing where like Superman, because of fighting Batman with like kryptonite and whatnot, like doesn't really have enough power to really compete with him, and then it looks like it's going to be the end for Batman and Superman, and then out of nowhere Wonder Woman shows up with her shield and deflects Doomsday's blasts. The soundtrack gets really funky because they kind of have like the Wonder Woman theme already like going at that point, which is this like tribal drum and like electric guitar type thing. It's
like a plagiarized.
It's cool on its own. It's just kind of out of place because like the rest of the score has been like typical Hans Zimmer and like, you know, orchestral and whatnot, and then it's gonna like.
Right, it's like the plagiarized like Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song kind of that like Hans Zimmer was probably like, please don't make me do this.
There's another guy that worked on the soundtrack, so it might have been him. He's got a weird name.
I think they worked together. He was like somebody that they were like, Hans, you can work with this guy, and he's like, okay.
I think it was actually a guy he worked on Man of Steel with, if I'm not mistaken. So they might have just been working together again. I can't find it. Oh, music. Junkie XL, who provided additional music in Man of Steel, also returned for this film, helping to compose the theme for Batman. Oh, okay, so he worked on that one. It doesn't say who did the Wonder Woman one. Anyway,
I feel like the Doomsday, I mean, like, just to touch on the Doomsday again, I feel like the Doomsday origin in the comics and the Doomsday, like, origin in this movie is a perfect analogy of, like, how little time sensitivity there is in this film. Like, in the comics, like, Doomsday is created by this, like, alien scientist on, like, another planet who spends, like, decades, like, kind of, like, just killing this baby and then cloning it and then killing this baby and then cloning it. So it learns just to, like, hate mankind. It has, like, this unstoppable sort of need to just, like, hate. And it doesn't really know what to do with itself, and it's sort of this indestructible force that, you know, somehow gets sent to Earth. And, you know, but in this movie, it's just like Lex Luthor kind of, like, just brews himself, like, spaceship soup overnight with, like, goop spaceship broth and, like, Zod's corpse and, like, his blood for some reason. It's just like...
Yeah, I guess that's just the recipe for Doomsday.
For Doomsday soup.
I mean, I think that it's more indicative and suffers more from the lack of development for Lex Luthor's character.
And, like, what was the
it's
plan?
It's, like, partially the weird, like, trying to be Heath Ledger Joker
Right.
in terms of like,
This-
oh, just creating chaos and whatnot.
Right,
Like,
this was
and it
the-
doesn't
yeah.
totally fit in terms of his like hatred for like aliens and like otherworldly stuff. And like, I mean, I guess it's just him trying to kill Superman, but like it doesn't really, because it's something that he starts planning before the whole Batman Superman
Right, yeah.
fight that he's been trying to orchestrate.
Well, that's the other thing. It's
Not like he had a way to. And Doomsday, it's not like he like responds to like Lex Luthor. He just will kill whatever and like is going off like destroying whatever. So it's
Right,
not like
yeah.
Lex Luthor had some plan for like, okay, well, after he kills Superman, what do I do then?
right, yeah. It's like Lex Luthor wants Batman and Doomsday to kill Superman, and yeah, it is like, what happens after he kills Superman? Like,
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't. It doesn't seem like something that's really thought through as much as just kind of like, oh, I'm on this ship.
right,
I know a little bit because there is the scene where he kind of says like, "Teach me everything" or something to the
Right.
AI, and kind of like Matrix downloads essentially like all this like information. So that's obviously where he learns about him. But it just kind of seems like an off the cuff, like, oh, that's like a really bad thing from Kryptonian like mythology. Like, all right,
Right, yeah.
let's create Doomsday, because they even say like the AI Carla Gugino's whatever Krypton AI, like they're not allowed to say like Doomsday, like the name, like it's kind of like the Voldemort of Krypton.
right, yeah.
But again, we keep getting sidetracked for this, but then that's kind of where Wonder Woman comes in. And in the trailer, I thought it was kind of dumb and like fan servicey. I hate when they keep doing this in trailers now. I would have liked it more if it was kind of like a big reveal as opposed to knowing that it was coming in.
Right, yeah.
Like even for the new not Captain America, or is it Captain America Civil War, or is it Avengers Civil War? It's Captain America
Captain
Civil War.
America, right, yeah.
They revealed that like the new Spider-Man's gonna come in. Like that would be like a really cool reveal to just actually have happen organically without like hinting at it in the trailer. Like, and yeah, I obviously know that they're trying to just draw more people in for the release of that, but like same thing with Wonder Woman. I think it would have been a lot cooler if you hadn't like known that was the big reveal.
Right.
But even still, I think it is kind of executed in a cool way. And I kind of had a similar feeling to, spoiler alert for another movie, but the ending of Star Wars The Force Awakens.
Right.
Which is kind of something that's outside of the film, but just in terms of the underrepresentation of like females, or even just the poor representation of females, not only in comic books, but especially in comic book cinema. Like really all we've had is like the horrible like Elektra movie, the Catwoman movie, and then you have Wonder Woman, which is like one of the more iconic female superheroes and definitely one of the more successful ones. Yet we haven't had a Wonder Woman movie. And this is kind of, obviously they're going to make a Wonder Woman movie. It's already planned already, but just seeing a woman superhero on screen, like kicking ass in a way that like the male superheroes couldn't, felt pretty cool and kind of overdue, in the same way that like Rey kicking Kylo Ren's ass in that scene felt cool. I had that same kind of reaction of like, yes, bitch, like just slay.
Right. I liked it. I kind of liked it. I don't know. I can't imagine watching just a movie of her though. I don't like Gal Gadot or whatever her name is.
Really?
What is like her like acting history? Like, I was in Fast and the Furious as a pretty girl who like.
I think she captures the Wonder Woman. She's
Somebody,
got the look for Wonder Woman,
Right.
and she's also got that kind of like, because Wonder Woman is just kind of that like take no shit type, like,
right.
she's like of like Amazon descent, like a society without men, and all the interactions she has with like Bruce Wayne are like back off fuckboy type like attitude.
Right.
I think she plays it well. It's nothing groundbreaking, but I think it is a pretty good representation of Wonder Woman.
I think the physical like attraction and just look is there, but I wish I wrote down who said this, or I think it might have been one of my friends I was talking to, or some article I was reading, but somebody in a review described her performance as when an athlete goes on Saturday Night Live and tries to act. Like, I couldn't understand like every 3 words she would say. Like if you go and watch it, like go look it up, like a Gal Gadot like interview, she's like, I think that I is it. Like she kind of talks like that.
Well, I mean, she is
like
supposed to, because she's obviously not like, Wonder Woman is definitely not like American or in that aspect, but she's also like, I think they said, and they're going with one of the alternate creations of Wonder Woman where she is literally like a descendant of Zeus, whereas I think in other ones she was formed from like clay by Zeus or by the gods and whatnot. Whereas this one, she's
but she's been here for hundreds of years.
She's literally a demigod.
There's black and white photos of her. She seems like, you know, like.
Well, I think it's just another way to, because if she's just talking like regularly and human, then it's just kind of like, okay. Whereas like it's a small subtle way to be like, she's not human. She is literally like a demigod. She's not something that we can totally relate to. They even do it with.
I just think,
and it was something that I appreciated about Henry Cavill's performance as Superman. I think he does a fucking great job as Superman. I don't think he gets enough credit, just because Superman has been done.
Nobody likes him as Superman.
I fucking love him as Superman.
Yeah.
Like, he really captures like that idea of Superman not really fitting in and literally being an alien. Like, even just in the way that like he'll just kind of like stare off in the distance at times, and then he has this like weird kind of inflection when he talks where it's almost like just like oblivious to the way that like we kind of would perceive it when he's talking about like these like morally upright things. Like,
right,
it's not really like cool or aware. It's just kind of like almost like like an autistic like vigilante.
Right,
it's just kind of like, we have to do the right thing at all times, like, but still a little bit more dynamic than that. I don't know. I really like his performance. I think it's very true to, at least I haven't read a lot, but the Superman comics that I have read have really seemed to capture that kind of outsiderness and that separateness from humanity and struggling with that and being sad about that. A lot of people have said that his performance is like overly like brooding. I really didn't get that from his performance at all. Like, I mean, the scenes that he is brooding in, it's when he's like, you know, seeing like the love of his life with like a gun to her head. Like, obviously he's going to have a stern expression on his face. Like, but then in other scenes, like, you know, he's more just sad as opposed to like brooding.
Right. I just, and I mean, now that we're here, everybody's fighting Doomsday. Lois Lane's. Sorry, I just keep putting out negative things, but there's literally, if you point to any fucking scene in this movie, I just can probably find something that I just didn't like about it. Lois Lane's role during this whole shindig of them fighting Doomsday is so stupid. It's like right after Batman and Superman stop fighting, like she picks up like the spear of kryptonite that Batman has welded himself, and she's like, oh no, and then she kind of like waddles over to like the pool that's like at the bottom of the building that they're fighting, and she like throws it in instead of like keeping it for Superman. Like, oh, maybe we should put this like somewhere safe, kind of. Like, she just kind of like solves it like right then and there, which I don't have a problem with. Whatever. So then anyway, then like 2 scenes later, Batman is looking at this thing, and he's kind of like discovered that it's like Kryptonian or whatever. Like, he understands that, and he's like, oh shit, like I need that staff. And then it cuts to like a scene of Lois Lane where she's like halfway out of the building, and she's like, oh no, and she kind of like turns back around and like runs back into the, like, she's wearing like some sort of high heels and like waddles back into the building. Like, she somehow like read Batman's mind of like, Batman needs it, better go get it, and like kind of like gets in there, and then or knew that like Lex Luthor had like government oriented or like government owned like Krypton ship, and dragged like the corpse of like General Zod into the spaceship and like cut his hand into.
Well, I think it is kind of a logical conclusion, because in this universe, it's not like there's other aliens that they've come into contact with. Every alien thing they've come into contact with has been Kryptonian. And she, obviously being the boyfriend of Superman, knows that Kryptonian things, or kryptonite rather, is his weakness. But I think it is kind of a logical. It is a little bit of a jump, but it's a little bit of a jump threads.
Because her boyfriend looks exactly like her, and this is like an orc, like, you know, like that's like the size of a fucking small building. Like, you know, it's like, how would, like, oh, my boyfriend reacts poorly to that, like, maybe this huge thing will, like, she, like, I feel like we've only seen, you know, like, it's just it's stretching it a little bit.
I mean, I think it's more of an effort, and I had read a review, not a review, but again, when I was looking through the hashtags, so it's more of the fandom's review of the film and their opinions of certain things, and someone was saying how they appreciated that not only through like the flash forward, the vision type thing where they say that, you know, Lois Lane is the key. Like, obviously we're not just going to have Lois Lane just be Superman's love interest and just be some kind of like damsel
Right.
in distress, even though she does end up being saved a lot. I think they do a good job of trying to make her be her own character with her own stuff, and she's not just, you know, a plot device for Superman to save. She does have her own things that she's trying to do in terms of her career, and also, again, like she's trying to be useful during this, like, you know, battle for the end of the world. And then I think she's obviously going to play a big part in the future of the DC extended universe because of that flash forward thing. So I think that was kind of their effort to be like, you know, Lois Lane doesn't need to just be this like pretty looking Superman girlfriend. Like, she can be a player in this kind of fight that's going on.
However, she is.
Isn't the most effective thing in terms of the plot. But
She
I can
kind
see
of
where
just
they're
drowns
going with it.
herself. Like nobody's like, oh, I got you now, Lois Lane. She just kind of jumps into a pool and can't get back out. Like, but she's a fucking device, and the mom is too. Like they can't like make another one of these movies and be like, Superman, we've got your mom. Like, because
They
it
did kind of
happens
use like all of his weaknesses.
Yeah.
Like Lois.
Yeah. How many, like, literally 3 or 4 times in both
I
the Man of Steel
I don't
and
think
this
they have
movie.
another specifically Superman movie planned. If you look at the DC extended universe, it looks like it's kind of
But
like.
still, I mean, like, I just.
I mean, I think they know most of the plot points that are going to happen already for the rest of these movies. So I don't. They might
It's already happened too much. It's already happened too much.
Yeah,
so,
and I don't think they. But it doesn't seem like they would even really have an opportunity to
Right, yeah.
to pull that kind of stuff again.
But it's.
Obviously, they'll have to have some
every
kind of
time
weakness
Lois
in
Lane
the
is in
Justice
trouble,
League
yeah.
movies.
But Lois Lane being in trouble in that pool trying to get that thing is essentially a device to bring her there. Just like it's a device to bring him to Lex Luthor. Like it's a device to bring, you know, him anywhere, really.
I guess maybe to just kind of wrap up.
Superman dies.
Yeah, which again, I can see why a lot of people would have problems with this scene because it's something we're not used to at all in some like the Nolan Batman trilogy and the more grounded superhero movies. But I think this is a quintessential like Superman type of storyline in terms of Superman literally gets nuked while fighting something in like outer space. It's so zany, it's so out there,
But
like
he doesn't die from that.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, he quote unquote dies in the movie, and then obviously we know that he's going to be alive after that, and they have that
Right.
kind of Inception type ending where
Right.
his casket is like rumbling at the end. But just the idea of like nuking an alien demigod type thing in space fighting another Kryptonian alien, it's there's so much like suspension of disbelief that has to happen. And I can see why, and I've seen a lot of reviews already that have, you know, said like, oh, like Superman gets nuked in space, just to give you an idea of like what fucking happens in this movie.
I don't.
But
have
in
a
my
problem
opinion,
with that
I
at
think that's
all,
a
yeah.
quintessentially like Superman like
It's a superhero
plot
movie,
line. Like
yeah.
literally, like there's other comics, and they always it's one of the most iconic like Superman storylines is him flying around the Earth fast enough in reverse to like turn back time. Like Superman is very not grounded in reality at all. And obviously there's a little bit of logic that goes into these plot lines, but you know, he is a very out there escapist, literally an alien type of superhero. So I don't have a problem with that plot line at all as much as a lot of the negative reviewers of this movie have. But yeah, Superman quote unquote dies.
Here's my beef though. There's like no build up towards that. It's not earned at all in my opinion. There's no, you know, like in the theater, there's no emotional reaction really. I don't know anybody that was like, oh,
after
no.
or
like yeah, when he died, or like when he dies, or like when they're mourning him, they have like this huge continuous mourning scene of of his funeral and everything. There's just like, and now that they've done that, there's like no stakes really for the Justice League or any other movie that they'll ever have him in. Like he's already died and been resurrected. You know, even in the movie, like, why were people sad that Superman died? Like nobody fucking even liked him. Like I feel like everybody in this movie hated him.
well, again, I
they
think
were just like
it was another
protesting him
example of like
yesterday.
the things that they really got mad about him about was when he was interfering in international affairs and stuff unilaterally. Whereas they do appreciate him when he helps them against. Obviously, they tried to nuke this alien and it only made him like stronger, even though it killed Superman. Like they had nothing to combat these extraterrestrial forces at, and that's where they do really appreciate Superman and kind of, regard him as a hero, because he is a part of the troop that ends up saving them from this doomsday character. So
I think they blew their load way too early. I think this is a plot line that is far off. Especially the Superman dying from Doomsday is very, very far in the. They can rearrange the plot however they want.
I mean, they are already pretty far in a lot of this because we're already into like Frank Miller, like old aging like Batman at this point. Like it is a very weird kind of timeline and everything. But I thought that the response was appropriate. I actually really liked the way that the funeral and everything was handled in terms of. That's the scene I had talked about before where Hans Zimmer's score I think is really working the best. I think that's clearly the part that he cared the most about, felt the most unique to him, and worked the hardest on. Just that kind of that a cappella choir setting that's going on during the funeral.
Right.
And then they switch to the Kansas funeral going on, and they have like the bagpipes going, which was something that I felt very Zack Snyder for a reason, just because he has some of those weird music choices sometimes. But it also felt kind of grounded in reality, like that's the way that like all like police and like government and like whatever like funerals are handled with those like bagpipes and something. It just felt very like New York and Metropolis, and you know what I'm saying? Like if like a police sergeant dies, there's that bagpipe type funeral. I don't know, something about that felt like an acceptance of Superman as a part of American society and of, our kind of law enforcement and military and whatnot. So I really liked that scene. And I thought there were a lot of great Zack Snyder type like visuals in that scene. There was like silhouettes against the sunset and like the like huge like cannons firing in like slow motion, which a lot of people criticized.
I was so checked out. Like as soon as he died, I was like, oh fuck.
I was fucking into it, man. I was fucking into
it. They spend this whole movie trying to set up like a whole franchise at the expense of the plot, and then they do this with the plot, and I just lost all respect for this movie at that point. I know I lost respect for this movie a long time ago, but I don't know. I was checked out. I was checked out of this movie by the time Superman died. What a movie.
There's a lot to talk about.
But I mean, how far are we into this podcast?
About 2 hours and 10 minutes.
Oh, guys, we're not going to make it. Yeah, you want to show some fingers? You want to show some fingers while also like trying to blaze through some points, like.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I want to touch on just real briefly that we haven't touched on is Jeremy Irons as Alfred, which was, I think, one of my least favorite things about this. And I don't really know how I would have handled it differently.
Same, I don't really know.
But I just feel like Alfred has been done to his like pinnacle and to his best already. Like even in like the Tim Burton, I forget what that actor's name was, but he was like the perfect like Alfred. And then even Michael Caine, maybe not better than him, but still very, very good and captured the Alfred character. And then Jeremy Irons doesn't really add anything to Alfred.
It almost
and he also seems younger than Alfred has been.
Yeah, I was about to
even
say
though
that.
This is like old Batman, like it's almost like Alfred should be like dead at this point. And the only thing that they really adds to Alfred is like,
and he looks younger too.
Yeah, he drinks now, and like that's about it. And again, he's not a huge character in this. He's just kind of there because Batman always has Alfred. But I just thought it was kind of like why we could have done something different, or at least maybe Alfred's character is that he's really, really fucking old now, like, and can't do much.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't seem like it added much to the movie at all. And it felt like a wasted performance from having a really great actor like Jeremy Irons in that role.
When like Batman was like going to save Martha Kent, and he's in like that ship, and he's like, "Get me closer." And he's like, "I'm gonna jump out. Like, you take control now of like the hover ship or whatever he was in." And I was like, "Oh God!" Like, Alfred's going to start killing people. I was like, this movie's about to like really fucking turn. Yeah. But they seemed like too close in age to like where Alfred is like this figure that was supposed to like serve his parents and then sort of take over where he's family, enough to trust him, enough to know about the whole Batman thing. So it was that was a little.
I mean, they really needed to cast someone like much older. and I guess that didn't fit with the idea. I mean, they are trying to create a somewhat darker Alfred, I guess, just by like drinking and whatnot, but he still has that like really high, like Alfred's always been like the
Right.
voice of reason, and Batman's kind of like conscious character. So they sort of kept that while making him a little bit darker, but it just didn't really do much for me. And then, sorry, the other last thing I wanted to talk about real briefly is the portrayal of the Bruce Wayne character in terms of Batman. I feel like in a lot of the other ones, they kind of like, especially in the Nolan trilogy, like they make Bruce Wayne not care at all about like women and like sleeping around and stuff like that. Whereas in this one, it's kind of like almost like a James Bond version of like Batman, where like he's willing to kind of flirt with women to get, his detective end or whatever he's seeking. And then there is a scene where he literally like wakes up from a night of just like a one night stand, and we literally don't even see the woman because she's that like nameless to him.
Right.
And I think it kind of does a great job of portraying his character as being in sort of inner turmoil at the time. Like he's drinking a little bit, which is kind of weird to see for Batman, and to see him having an affair, not affair, but just a fling with someone that serves no other purpose besides just being this millionaire playboy and actually like acting on those sexual desires. I think it was just kind of new for Batman for me, because
Did
usually
Christian Bale do that though?
I don't know if he actually ever slept with them. Like he would like do it to keep up appearances in it,
Right.
but then like when it ever came down to anything, he was just kind of like, all right, hit the bricks. Like I don't think he ever actually slept with anyone.
Yeah, I mean,
And he always had that weird kind of like singular obsession with Rachel throughout the trilogy,
Okay.
which I mean, at least not in the Batman graphic novels and comic books that I've read, there was never really like a singular Batman love interest. It was kind of just this obsession with fighting crime, but he was still kind of, doing whatever around town with whatever ladies, just because he's Bruce Wayne, he's in turmoil from not having enough therapy for things that have happened in his life.
Right.
So I appreciated that portrayal. I thought that was kind of something that's been lacking from some of the other ones. Not that the other trilogies were bad, but this was kind of a fresh take in my opinion. But yeah, to move towards conclusion of this episode, I don't know who wants to go first for final wrap ups.
I'll go first, just because I have a few points that I didn't touch on, and I feel like I can really start to expose my opinion for this film, even though I feel like I already have. Yeah, I checked out of this movie pretty. I feel like around Doomsday, really. Completely just wasn't really caring what was happening. The last 25 minutes was just pure confusing, pointless destruction more, and they had like Doomsday, like the newscast of like Doomsday landed on Strikers Island, which is like a play on like New York City's like Rikers Island, like blaring through the soundtrack. The news report like announces, that it's uninhabited, which in the DC universe and our universe both are actually a prison island. There's an entire prison on there. They would have killed everybody in the prison, but whatever. And yeah, and again, like I said at the beginning, like even when they lure Doomsday back to the city, because of the spear, or just to destroy more buildings, Batman has a line where he like literally almost looks at the camera and he's like, "There's nobody in this area." Like it was just kind of like goofy. Also, like the whole thing about like Clark Kent not liking Batman because of like his like methods, which is kind of laughable because Superman kills all these people. Like, like it was just kind of, is this film...
Well, Superman doesn't kill people.
Right,
It's
no.
that whole micro versus macro thing where
Exactly.
on a small scale, Superman will do whatever he can to not kill anyone. But when it comes to these like large scale, alien world threatening things, he does what he has to do. Whereas Batman's never really faced that. He's always fighting these
Right.
like, this little sex dungeon here, or, this little crime ring here and whatnot.
But it was like Murder Man versus Captain Hypocrite. And so the dream sequences, I just would cut them out of the film altogether. They just seemed to be there to kind of be like, make the audience be like, wow, what did that mean? Kind of, or like to put them in the trailer, they looked really cool in the trailer, honestly. I don't know. I just, the first half of the film I thought was just boring, depressing, almost incoherent. There was really no narrative thrust. Scenes just kind of happened. And just even fundamentally from a filmmaking perspective, it was like so bad because it'd be like close up, close up, close up, close up, close up in another location. Like, I guess we're in a different scene now. Like, it was just like that the entire fucking movie. And you could like rearrange a ton of the scenes and it would still kind of be the same movie. It would just make as little sense. I don't know, just being in the theater, it was just loud, obnoxious, miserable, tiresome, worn out, just old after a while. Batman's, violently murdering people with no remorse, just indiscriminately. And I just want to end on, to what extent do we go to make a film dark? Really, like the Christopher Nolan Batman series really sort of coined that dark superhero, and so many superhero movies have taken after that. And it brings me back to that fucking New Yorker review about the Deadpool movie. Like watching the film is like sitting at dinner with a teenager who believes that if it swears like long and loudly enough, he will shock the grown-ups into accepting him as one of their own, except just replacing swearing with just meaningless, like morbid, dark shit. It's like sitting at, dinner with like the Columbine kids. Like, yeah, I'm sure they're really dark, but they're not Edgar Allan Poe. Like, none of this makes really sense. They're just moody high school moody high school kids. And that's kind of what this film feels like. And I do, for the record, think this was a worse movie than Deadpool. Because Deadpool, I think, you have to review every movie on its own grounds. Deadpool was a comedy that missed a few of its jokes, kind of. It had a reasonable plot compared to whatever the fuck was going on here. And I don't know. I just feel like this whole production was a mess. I remember watching a press conference about the movie, and everyone kept talking about how it was such a smart superhero movie, and they were afraid audiences weren't going to get it because it was so smart. And Ben Affleck kept saying, he was like, the first time I read the script, I didn't get it. Like, it's just so smart, and like I finally understand it. It's very intelligent, and it just it all just seems like bullshit. And I just didn't even know who to root for in this film. I don't know. I'm just wasting time because now I think I'm pretty much decided on one finger. One finger.
It's not only Batman versus Superman, it's Mike versus Joe.
Yeah. But I like it. Again, I mean, I like this. The reason we have this podcast, so there can be two different
we were definitely very excited for this, just because we knew going into this we had pretty different reactions to this.
But I feel like we
have a squad chat thing that we have going on with a bunch of our friends.
Right.
One friend in particular, Ken, was a very big fan of Deadpool and was not happy with our review of Deadpool and our opinion of Deadpool. And immediately after I got back from seeing this movie, I just typed in the chat, Batman versus Superman was better than Deadpool with a winky face. And 2 seconds later, it just says, Ken has removed you from the chat. But I think I do have to stand by that. It's weird. It's a weird thing because for every criticism you make, I can see that. And it's not like I'm ignorant of the things that are wrong with this movie, or I think the movie might be a little bit of an acquired taste in a way.
Right.
And I think maybe I was just looking for different things. There's a lot going on. The plot is definitely all over the place, but I don't think it's as hard to follow as a lot of reviews have made it out to seem.
Right.
I think if you are kind of paying attention, at least for me, it wasn't the type of movie that I had to go home and look at the Wikipedia plot and be like, what happened? Like, I felt like I followed everything that was going on throughout. To me, I was, even while watching the movie in real time, was able to trace threads between, these plot points of like, why are we showing the Wayne's death?
Right,
why would, Batman have this decision? why would these things happen? I thought it was they had a lot of good, plant and payoff, and I thought everything was well grounded and made sense for me. I thought they did a really good job of explaining, why this fight would happen in the first place. That felt like real and whatnot. The fight was cool. It lived up to the bill. I feel like for every criticism that people make of it, there's something that I can at least justify it in my brain, maybe if not to everyone else. And I don't know if I can convince anyone else to like this movie.
Right.
But and I think for anyone who is a fan of this movie, there is some kind of justification there. And like I said before, I think my biggest justification for the movie in general is that it's not your typical superhero movie, and it's more of just a comic book movie. And I the entire time that I was watching it, I felt like I was reading, a Zack Snyder comic, which I think to some other people might just be a criticism of the movie in general. And I think probably knowing you, that's probably one of your criticisms is why wouldn't it just be made as a movie as opposed to a comic book movie?
Right.
But I don't know. I enjoyed that. I really, really enjoyed the visuals because that was one of the things I loved most about Watchmen is just these sprawling, large, grandiose visuals that he creates. And I thought that was, as much as I liked Man of Steel, I thought that was lacking in Man of Steel. It was kind of like Zack Snyder trying to be something that he's not, creating this almost like I think when we saw the trailer for Man of Steel, we were like, this is like Superman, like Tree of Life, walking around like the wheat fields. It was trying to almost do what like Christopher Nolan had done in the original Batman to Superman. And I think this is kind of Zack Snyder being like, you know what, fuck that. Like, this is what I'm actually good at is, a knowledge of comic book culture and comic book visuals, especially on top of all. And I think he really succeeds in doing that. And again, I think a lot of the negative reception has to do with kind of this culture shock of seeing Batman in this scenario and just seeing a superhero movie in this scenario of just outlandish for a movie plot points, Superman getting nuked in space or, Batman in some weird dystopian apocalyptic vision of the future fighting like moth aliens. That it's something that where you wouldn't really bat an eye in like a comic book, but in a movie that's just weird. We're not used to that. Like even in like the Marvel universe where there is some weird like dimensions and other planetary stuff, we're not used to that kind of stuff. I think a lot of people have said that this is too serious and could have used a little bit more humor. And that's also something we touched on with like Suicide Squad getting the reshoots for this. But I think it was kind of refreshing to get away from that like lightheartedness that is kind of overdone in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where it's just kind of like everything is a setup for some like fan service punchline of like, here's this character and here's this character and here's this, joke from the comics. And there is a little bit of that in this, but I thought the seriousness was good, and I did kind of appreciate the darkness of it. And it is definitely a setup for more DC Extended Universe movies, but I still think the plot functions completely fine on its own, and I don't think there's a lot that necessarily suffers from setting up for those movies, apart from those the Aquaman and the Flash footage and all that, because that was pretty horrible. But to wrap it up, pretty much, overall, I had fun. I thought the entire thing was fun and entertaining, and definitely one of the most visually stunning superhero movies that we've seen, in its own right. Whereas like the Nolan Batman trilogy is maybe not as visually iconic, while still it has a good, consistent visual tone to it. Whereas this just has like some scenes that are like, I just want to screen grab all of them, just all the different things that Zack Snyder is able to put into these specific frames.
Definitely, right.
With a lot of slow motion stuff. And I think that some of the story and the acting leaves something to be desired, but I don't think it's enough to really ruin the experience. I think there was enough fresh things in this movie that I haven't seen in a superhero movie before that I really, really liked. So I will settle on 3.5 out of 5 stars. I think it was better than average, better than Deadpool, better than Paul Blart Mall Cop. So what does that come out to? That might be one of our biggest differences before I'd have to look at what our previous...
I think Anomalisa was bigger.
Maybe. So what do we got? 1 plus 3.5. 2.75, which will round down to 2.5 fingers.
All right.
Which I guess is kind of indicative of it being just split down the middle.
Right.
Mike versus Joe, Dawn of Justice.
Well, Mike v. Joe.
Mike v. Joe. Mike v. period Joe. Colon Dawn of Justice.
Oh, boy.
Dawn of Jaeger.
But I'm glad we kept this episode short. We learned from the Cloverfield episode.
Although I do have to say, when I posted this on Facebook, I did warn that we were going to go. Right. It's impossible not to do a really long episode about this movie, I feel like. There's so much to talk about, just in terms of its implications for the superhero genre and in the DC extended universe. And it's just, the movie is admittedly all over the place.
Yeah.
There's just so much going on. They did really try to cram a lot in here. I think most of it was done effectively, but regardless, there's a lot going on. So if you'll excuse us for the one of our longest episodes ever, next week will be shorter, I promise you.
Yeah, keep a lookout for a 16-hour-long Zootopia review. We'll be really going into depth with that one. But I
guess just our general wrap up.
Right.
Make sure you check out the website, howmanyfingerspodcast.com. Check out all our ratings on there. What are you're smirking at me? What are you doing?
I have this like reflex now where I just want to say it's a mess. But go ahead and go like us on Facebook. We've really been into Twitter lately. I know we talk about that all the time. So go ahead and add us there at HMF Podcast and
just talk to us. Be our friend.
Yeah, give us some.
The reactions have been cool on Twitter. We've got a lot of cool people talking to us. So keep it up.
Give us some beer thoughts.
Beer thoughts.
Give us some. Synonyms for drunk.
Mm-hmm.
And just talk to us.
And wish us luck as we go to film our test shots for our own movie tomorrow.
Yeah. And we'll continue to keep you guys updated on that. Because you care about that, right?
Everybody cares about that. You're all going to watch it, right?